Chapter 181, Wood Dragon Rayquaza. Yan Hong suspected that Jiang Li wanted to engage in the sexual industry, but the spirit stones earned through that clearly could not satisfy the exaggerated demand of the yin burial coffin. He still had to think of another way with his advantage. This was the first time the 9 Nether clone had done this. It was originally a carefree tree, but now it still had to think of ways to earn money for the main body. Its experience was probably unique among the rest of its kind. His clone was currently doing market research in Nightless City, while Jiang Li's main body left the scripture storage valley again. After the competition ended, Jiang Li had already followed the group back to the sect. After that, he buried himself in cultivation. He spent a week to allow his body refinement cultivation method, the mountain-crushing scripture, to take a step closer to attain the 9th level that was on par with the 9 Nether Dao scripture. Next, he just had to wait for an opportunity to attempt foundation establishment at any time. At this moment, Elder He found him and gave him an exquisite small sword that was the size of a palm. It was the token of the Shu Mountain 5 Elements Peak, the #1 sect in the Great Mountain region. According to Elder He, Shu Mountain had specially invited him to thank him for saving Shenshin Kyuhyua's life. Moreover, he specially instructed Jiang Li to come over before he reached the Foundation establishment realm. Regarding this, Elder He clearly knew something. However, he did not say anything and only told Jiang Li that the Shu Mountain 5 Elements Peak wanted to give him a fortuitous encounter. It was extremely beneficial to the construction of his Dao Foundation, and he should treat it seriously. Jiang Li held the small sword and could only sigh helplessly. The opportunities in the Shu Mountain alone were many. The things left behind by their ancestors were simply endless. It was no wonder that they were the boss of the region. Rayquaza full speed ahead. Jiang Li patted the wooden dragon beneath him. The first fully awakened wood demon that had already been named Rayquaza flapped its tail and flew towards the distant horizon. Yes, under Jiang Li's meticulous nurturing, this demon wood dragon that was still ignorant a few days ago could already fly. After all, Jiang Li was the greatest contributor to this great mountain cultivator competition. After the competition, he naturally met the Valley Master, Taoist Wush. Apart from a large number of conventional rewards, Taoist Wush was also very polite and told Jiang Li to ask for anything. If it was an ordinary disciple, they would most likely first express their loyalty before politely rejecting him. This should be a very safe reply. However, Jiang Li was different. If the Valley Master dared to give it, he would dare to take it. He did not even hesitate and directly proposed his request. His request was not difficult. He only wanted the sect's weapon refinement hall to help him. They would give his demon wood dragon a complete set of spirit rune carvings according to the standards of the warships and flying ships. At that time, the expressions of the weapon refinement hall elders present darkened. The Valley Master had given the promise, but it was their turn to pay the bill. It was really unlucky. However, although they were complaining, they were not complacent when it came to work. After a few days of hard work by the people of the Weapon Refinement Hall, the current Rayquaza appeared. Every piece of tree bark and leaf on its body was covered in dense and complicated spiritual carvings, causing the originally mighty wooden dragon to appear even more mysterious and elegant. This wooden dragon was transformed from Jiang Li's 9 Nether spiritual chi. It was born at the Foundation establishment realm. Now that it was covered in the spirit rune carvings of a warship and having Jiang Li's spirit surging technique, it could already be considered a very qualified mount. The huge wooden dragon swayed its body formed by a large amount of leaves, the broom-like tail as it gradually lit up. The acceleration runes on the leaves lit up one after another. The 30-meter-long wooden dragon began to accelerate continuously as it sped into the distance. The Scripture Storage Valley and the Shu Mountain 5 Elements Peak were not too far apart, but Jiang Li flew at full speed on the back of Rayquaza. It took him 4 days and 3 nights to finally arrive. In his previous life, he He could fly twice around the earth using this time. As the sun approached, Jiang Li saw the 5 sword-shaped mountains standing in the sunlight from afar. Even though he had seen it many times through the eyes of the sword cultivator clone, he could not help but be deeply shocked when he saw such a magnificent scene with his own eyes. It was truly a miraculous creation. No matter who saw this scene, they would not doubt that these were 5 immortal mountains. He patted Rayquaza's back and made it slow down from the high-speed flight. The Shu Mountain 5 Elements Peak was good-looking, but the 5-peak array formation was not a joke. If he accidentally triggered the Grand Array and struck him with his sword, he would be wronged. Scripture Storage Valleys, Jiang Li has come to pay a visit. Jiang Li controlled the wooden dragon to stop outside the Shu Mountain realm. After taking out the small sword and infusing spiritual qi into it, the small sword immediately emitted a spiritual light and shot towards Shu Mountain. Soon, a few sword lights flew towards him from within Shu Mountain. Junior brother Jiang, I knew that it must be you when I saw this wooden dragon. I didn't know that you would come at this time. I apologize for not going out to meet you. I'm really sorry. As Jiang Li took first place in the Qi Refinement Realm competition, the wooden dragon beside him also became famous. When others did not have a mount, this Rayquaza had already become part of Jiang Li's image. The people who came were Golden Light Sword Chang Wanju and a few other sword cultivators who seemed to be on duty. However, he actually saw a familiar face among them. I haven't seen senior brother Chang in a few days, and you're still as elegant as before. It was rude of me to visit you out of the blue. In addition, senior brother Xianxia, do you still remember me? After exchanging pleasantries, Jiang Li suddenly greeted a fire sword cultivator on duty. The sword cultivators on duty were also in groups of 5. The other 4 immediately looked at Xianxia in surprise, their eyes filled with question marks. They had not expected that their ordinary teammate would actually know the #1 Qi Refinement Realm cultivator of the Great Mountain region. Cough cough, junior brother Jiang Li, hello, long time no see. Xianxia smiled awkwardly before greeting Jiang Li. This fire attribute sword cultivator was the first Shu Mountain sword cultivator Jiang Li had seen. At that time, Jiang Li, who had just started cultivation, only had a few pitiful buffs on him and was very weak. He had a short conflict with this fire sword cultivator before, and in the end, he had a slight advantage. This was also the only draw he had since the start of his cultivation journey. You know each other. Jiang Li nodded, and he did not say that they had only met once. Instead, he said that they were friends. Chang Wanju was slightly surprised as well. How brilliant and outstanding was Jiang Li. It turned out that there was someone he knew in the sect. Could it be that this Xianxia was also a genius that had been ignored? Looks like he had to pay more attention to this person in the future. Junior brother Jiang Li, it's been a long time. It's already late, so I'll bring you to rest first. Elder Wei has already arranged a place for you to stay. Follow me. Shu Mountain had invited Jiang Li, so they naturally would not let him be rejected for nothing. After exchanging a few pleasantries, they led him into the mountain. However, Golden Light Sword, Chang Wanju, turned around and brought Jiang Li to the water element peak. The moment he landed, he sensed the water attribute spiritual qi in the surroundings and knew that this was definitely the water element peak. However, this Elder Wei was the Metal Sword Peak's peak master. Why was he arranged to stay at the water element peak? Oh, it's like this. Junior brother Jiang Li, your spiritual root is wood and metal subdues wood. It's really impolite to arrange for you to stay on the Metal Sword Peak, so it's best to stay on this water element peak. As if seeing through Jiang Li's confusion, Chang Wanju took the initiative to explain. When Jiang Li heard this, he felt that this made some sense. Then, under the gaze of a group of female water sword cultivators, Jiang Li was arranged to enter an independent guest room courtyard. This was like going to a female school and living in a female dormitory. It was a little exciting. In Nightless City, after leaving the prosperous Jianghong Inn, the clone returned to his original appearance and strolled around the nightless city. From an objective point of view, he thought about what this nightless city was lacking and what flaws there were in the business market. Due to the gradual opening of foreign trade in the Misty Mountain Range, the number of permanent residents had decreased. However, as an established trading center, the city's status would not be shaken for at least decades. Jiang Li walked around for a few days. Therefore, a scene appeared in Nightless City. A golden core cultivator with a golden token on his waist had nothing to do all day and night, and he was always wandering aimlessly on the streets. No one knew what he wanted to do. The actions of the 9 Nether clone made many people who were secretly paying attention to him work overtime for a few days. After all, if a golden core with an unknown identity and no weaknesses wanted to cause trouble, the consequences would be too great. However, through these few days of wandering around, he really discovered a business opportunity. It was a business opportunity that was only suitable for Jiang Li. That was to rent out cultivation chambers, or in other words, sell spiritual qi. The 9 Nether clone that had transformed into Green Mountain Ascetic stopped a few cultivator caravans that were about to leave Nightless City and head to the Misty Mountain Range. The other party was originally extremely displeased, but after he saw the golden token on the waist of the 9 Nether clone, he instantly calmed down and gathered all the members of the merchant group to wait for Jiang Li to continue. However, Jiang Li did not intend to rob them, nor did he have any ill intent. He only wanted to ask these cultivators who had stayed in Nightless City for most of their lives what they thought of this city. He wanted to know what was the reason that attracted them to leave and head to the Medicine Garden Mystic Realm. After they noticed that Jiang Li's clone did not intend to forcefully collect taxes, the leaders of the merchant groups heaved a sigh of relief. Although they were all at the core formation realm, the Void Core Stage and the Golden Core Stage were two completely different concepts. He immediately told Jiang Li everything he knew. To these forces and merchants who already had some capital, their goal was naturally the large number of aged spiritual materials produced in the mystic realm. In fact, they did not plan to give up on Nightless City. It was just that they had to establish another stronghold in the Misty Mountain Range. These answers were all the same, and it was meaningless to Jiang Li. However, he also noticed that there were many low-level rogue cultivators following these caravans. They were the ones who really wanted to move to the Misty Mountain Range to try their luck. These rogue cultivators were at the Qi Refinement Realm and Foundation Establishment Realm. Their strength was average. To them, who did not have many spirit stones on them, even if the Misty Mountain Range was a new beginning, it was still very difficult for them to grasp any opportunities. This relocation was most likely just trying to get a chance. However, after asking carefully, they told Jiang Li that there was actually another reason why they made the decision to abandon the familiar environment and prepare to develop elsewhere. That was the concentration of spiritual qi in the Misty Mountain Range was much higher than the outside world. Even if one did not achieve anything there, cultivating in that kind of spiritual qi environment every day would definitely increase their cultivation speed. At the very least, they could save a lot of qi-nourishing pills. That's right, the density of spiritual qi here was actually no different from that in the wilderness. This involved the knowledge of the spirit gathering array. In this cultivation world, it was not that there were no spirit designs for the effect of spirit gathering, but most of them were not effective and had a small range. For example, the effects of those small-scale spiritual qi arrays were not bad, but they were basically luxurious items that needed to be embedded with high-grade spirit stones and not rely on gathering the surrounding spiritual qi to take effect. However, high-grade spirit stones were expensive, and ordinary people were not fortunate enough to enjoy them. There were also large-scale spirit gathering arrays that could envelop an area and increase the concentration of spiritual qi in a large area. The Shu Mountain 5 Elements Peak and the Misty Mountain Range's Medicine Garden were both in this category. However, the cost of building such a large array formation was too expensive. Furthermore, it often required the use of natural terrain or a spirit stone mine to have an obvious effect. In this aspect, even the scripture storage valley that guarded the scripture imparting hall had yet to change, let alone the nightless city. Therefore, now that there was a misty mountain range with a large-scale spirit gathering array that was open to the public, even if he could not earn spirit stones there to change his fate, he could still cultivate under the richer spiritual chi. It was a sure-win situation. On the other hand, Jiang Li was thinking if he could make others pay for such a superior cultivation environment. No one would reject using medium and low-grade spirit stones to exchange for high-grade spiritual chi, right? The amount of spiritual chi that gushed out of his body every day, if calculated by the number of high-grade spirit stones, was approximately 20 a day. In terms of low-grade spirit stones, that was 2 million. It was enough to scare people to death. It was hard to say whether the spirit stone mines of these 4 major sects could produce as much as his in a day. As long as he distributed a portion of this spiritual chi and exchanged it for spirit stones at an equivalent or discount, the gains from this conversion would be extremely terrifying. Creating something from nothing and earning spirit stones every day. Just the thought of it made him a little excited. Of course, due to the influence of the consumption of cultivators, it was impossible for the true benefits to be so great. However, it was already a business that could allow Jiang Li to become rich in a short period of time. That was because he had no cost. Jiang Li immediately used his identity as Green Mountain Ascetic to lay down a large amount of land in the inner and outer cities. Using his status as a golden core cultivator, it was very simple to do this. As long as the rental fee was paid, all the procedures were practically instantly approved. With the status of 2 Chi refinement realm cultivators, they would definitely not be able to open such a huge business even with the scripture storage valley as their backer. Countless vicious dogs would come and find trouble with them because of the benefits. Therefore, this business could not be thrown to prosperous Jiang Hong. It could only be done by the 9 Nether clone. Only a golden core cultivator could barely qualify to control this business. In the rented space, his clone personally took action. Powerful and terrifying 9 Nether spiritual chi surged out, and a large number of houses and wooden buildings rose from the ground. Although the golden core of the clone was of the ice attribute, the attribute of the 9 Nether wood was still yin wood. With the powerful 9 Nether spiritual chi, the power of this spell technique was naturally stronger. Chapter 182. Green Mountain Residence welcomes guests. There were wooden buildings, solid wooden tables, chairs, and furniture. The carvings were vivid and lifelike. The mortal kingdoms might require labor, wealth, and bones. Things that could only be built after several years to more than a decade were completed by a golden core cultivator with a pat on the ground. The 9 Nether clone had the support of Jiang Li's surging spirit technique, and its main body was still staying in the coffin space with a high concentration of spiritual chi. Even if it was the output of a golden core cultivator, it was enough to completely withstand this situation. The spiritual chi in the clone's golden core did not even deplete much. After 2 consecutive large-scale spells, a group of wooden buildings appeared in the inner and outer cities. This was the prototype of the 9 Nether clone's business empire. With land and housing, he still needed employees to provide basic services. As a dignified golden core cultivator, he naturally could not personally receive guests. However, after recruiting people, he had to train them and raise them. He also had to prevent them from discovering his secret. Just thinking about it was a little troublesome. Fortunately, he had foresight. Wasn't there a group of well-trained and outstanding employees in the coffin? With a wave of his hand, he scattered a bunch of seeds and turned them into medium-sized humanoid wooden puppets. Jiang Li selected 300 clever ghost market ghosts and threw them into these wooden puppets. He then supplemented them with talisman papers, artificial human skin, and illusion techniques. under the lead of the Ghost City Lord, Xianxia. A team that could endure hardships and needed no salary was basically formed here. In any case, the procedures had already been settled in advance. Jiang Li, who lacked money, announced the opening of the store without hesitation. The Tao title that the Nine Nether clone casually gave itself was Green Mountain Ascetic. Therefore, these spirit-gathering facilities were collectively called the Green Mountain Residence. The actions of a golden core cultivator naturally attracted the gazes of many cultivators. From the moment the buildings rose from the ground, the terrifying spiritual chi that soared into the sky had already attracted a large number of cultivators to watch. Old Nine, you're well informed. Do you know what's going on? I don't know either, but I was fortunate enough to see the Lord who created this wooden building a few times. Let me tell you a secret. That Lord has a golden token from the Nightless City hanging on his waist. Gasped Golden Token, Golden Core Cultivator. Yes, I wonder what this Lord wants to do by creating this wooden building. Outside the wooden door, a large group of cultivators were gathered. They pointed at the door and speculated. Look, there's some movement. A cultivator suddenly cried out in alarm. In the next moment, a sapling suddenly broke through the soil in front of the wooden door and grew into a welcoming tree that was more than 10 meters tall. There are words on the tree. This is the Green Mountain Residence. As soon as he finished speaking, the door of Green Mountain Residence slowly opened. The traditional and sweet-looking Xianxia led the 36 female puppets out to welcome the guests. I am Xianxia, the servant of Lord Green Mountain Ascetic. I pay my respects to everyone. Those who come are guests. The Green Mountain Residence welcomes everyone's arrival. If you don't mind, please come into my guest building. The female ghost, Xianxia, bowed and invited the cultivators present to come in. Following her actions, the tree was instantly covered in gorgeous red flowers, as if it was welcoming guests with the female ghost. Of the two Green Mountain Residences, the first to open was naturally the one in the inner city. As long as they became famous here, the chi refinement cultivators in the outer city would naturally move when they heard the news. In the inner city, there were many foundation establishment cultivators and many core formation cultivators watching. Among them, many people saw through the identity of the female ghost, Xianxia. However, no one wanted to proclaim justice and slay the ghost. Behind Green Mountain Residence stood a golden core cultivator. If they caused trouble here, they would not get out unscathed. The surrounding cultivators still did not understand what this Green Mountain Residence's business was, but it was impossible to openly kill people in this nightless city. In any case, it was safe, so there was no harm in going in. Soon, the first interested person appeared. A core formation cultivator from a small sect took the lead to enter the Green Mountain Residence with the intention of getting close to the golden core cultivator, the Nine Nether clone. However, as soon as he stepped inside, his expression changed. How generous! The core formation cultivator could not help but praise. This door was only a step away, but the difference in the concentration of spiritual chi was actually 2 times. Moreover, he could smell an expensive smell in the air. This was actually high-grade spirit stones releasing high-purity spiritual chi. This kind of high-quality spiritual chi was easier to absorb by cultivators and was more convenient and faster to refine. If used long-term, it could even continuously increase the strength of one's spiritual chi. Although he was a core formation cultivator, he was only an elder of a small sect. He had only used high-grade spirit stones to cultivate a few times in his life when he broke through to the next realm. However, now, he actually discovered that someone was using high-grade spirit stones as a central air conditioner. This dealt a severe blow to his fragile heart, causing him to feel as if he had lived a dog's life. The large group of cultivators outside saw this core formation cultivator stop moving after entering. He even sucked in the air fiercely, looking like he was greedily enjoying it. It was obvious that the other party had encountered a good thing. The other cultivators could not help but follow in. When they entered, they were all stunned like the person in front. What was Green Mountain Ascetic's background? Was he too rich? At this moment, a strange scene appeared. In the Green Mountain residence of Nightless City, a group of hundreds of cultivators stood at the entrance for a long time without moving. Qin Shuman did not rush them. When she was thrown into the yin burial coffin, she had lost her composure in shock. It was at least 100 times worse than this group of cultivators. They were surprised by her master's actions. What was so surprising about that? It was not until a long time later that the few core formation cultivators were the first to react. They had come to Green Mountain residence to visit as guests, so why were they standing outside the door? The cultivators recovered from their shock and followed Qin Shuman and the ghost servants into the guest building. They had already decided that they would stay for the night no matter what. The first floor of this guest building was the reception hall. The second to third floors were the spiritual food and medicine dining area. The fourth to eighth floors were the shopping area, and the ninth floor was an auction house that had yet to be opened. However, although this venue had everything arranged, there were not many stores. There was only a group of ghost servants who looked like merchants selling some ordinary and even cheap items. Most of the shops here were still empty, presumably waiting for other forces and merchants to enter. Everything revealed the simplicity and shortcomings of the initial period of creation. Despite this, after they sat down, the tea served by the ghost servant maids was quite good. The spiritual tea was fresh and fragrant, and it had a refreshing flavor. Although it was not an earth-shattering high-grade tea, it was probably something that was produced using high-grade spiritual qi. This Green Mountain ascetic wanted to create a city in the city. How would the city lord of the Nightless City react when he found out? While most of the Foundation establishment cultivators were still sighing about the comfort of the dense spiritual qi environment, some cultivators were thinking more. Under the watch of the Nightless City, it was not a problem to do ordinary business. However, if he wanted to set up a city, it was probably not enough with the power of a golden core cultivator. However, although they thought about this, they still had to stay in this Green Mountain residence. Miss Qin, I see that this Green Mountain residence is quite large. There are many houses near this guest building. May I know if there are any free rooms? We admire your master very much and want to get to know him. I wonder if we can buy one of the rooms and stay there temporarily. The other cultivators beside him also put down their tea and fell silent. Allow me to explain. First, please look over here. Qin Shuman smiled charmingly. Under her cold white skin, there was a beauty between life and death. She led everyone to look at the two phrases hanging in the hall. On them were the words, "The Green Mountains are always visited by people. All the cultivators in the world gather in harmony. Those who come are our guests. My master is very hospitable. The purpose of our Green Mountain residence is to welcome guests. If everyone wants to stay, it naturally can't be any better. You just have to go to our counter and make a wooden tablet like this." Qin Shuman spread out her hands and displayed 4 wooden tablets to everyone. The colors of the 4 wooden tablets were slightly different, and they were respectively engraved with the words heaven, earth, profound, and yellow. For the sake of convenience, when Jiang Li was grading wooden tokens, he used the most commonly used grading criteria in the cultivation world. Below the black earth profound yellow, there were numbers. Everyone present was naturally overjoyed. In this environment filled with high-grade spirit stone spiritual qi, they had no other thoughts except to sit down and cultivate properly. However, most of the people present were either at the Foundation establishment realm or the core formation realm. They were all people who cared about their reputation, so they naturally could not directly squat down and cultivate in public. It was best to have a quiet room for cultivation. However, they were not blind. The wooden tablets were different. There were also ranks and numbers on them. With a glance, they knew that Qin Shuman had not finished speaking. "Miss Qin, is there anything special about the words on this wooden tablet?" A cultivator asked cooperatively. Human smiled slightly. Before the support in the crowd could say anything, someone helped to set the pace. Therefore, she took the opportunity to tell him the rules of charging spirit stones for the Green Mountain Wood card. For the most ordinary yellow wood card, it could only use the most ordinary townhouse cultivation chamber. Its basic target audience was Qi Refinement Realm cultivators. Each person had to spend at least 1 point per single room every day, which was equivalent to charging a spirit stone. This price made the originally excited cultivators fall silent. They quickly calculated. The concentration of spiritual qi was twice that of normal spiritual qi. Although it was high-grade spiritual qi, it could not increase one's cultivation much in a day. It was fine to try it occasionally, but staying here for a long time would undoubtedly be a loss. It was better to directly run to the Misty Mountain Range. It was more worth it. How could Human not know what they were thinking? She secretly gave a signal, and the hidden assistant in the crowd immediately understood. Miss Qin, the environment of Green Mountain residence is very good. The spiritual qi is abundant, but if we live here, 1 spirit stone per day is a little too expensive. The others nodded. This person spoke their minds. Human covered her mouth and smiled lightly. After a pause, she spoke again. This guest has misunderstood us. This double concentrated spiritual qi is only used by my master to raise flowers and grass. The concentration of spiritual qi in the cultivation chamber will naturally be different. Guests, feel it yourself. With a wave of her hand, the doors and windows of the guest building closed tightly. A force isolated the interior from the outside world. Before the cultivators could become wary, the concentration of spiritual qi in the guest building began to rise exponentially. The high-grade smell that filled the air made the eyes of the cultivators light up in excitement. If it was this concentration, it would be worth it. It would be worth it. At this moment, Human continued to explain the other 3 grades of wooden tablets. The higher the grade, the higher the corresponding concentration of spiritual qi. This time, the group of cultivators no longer had any doubts, only excitement and enthusiasm left. A higher-grade profound wood card could allow one to enjoy a small wooden house alone. Its basic target audience was foundation establishment cultivators. Each person had to spend 10 points on a wooden house every day, which was 10 low-grade spirit stones. The rooms of higher grades were also more expensive, by 10 times the price of the previous grade. The beautiful heaven-grade palace meant for nascent soul cultivators cost 1,000 spirit stones per person per day. If one wanted to increase the concentration of spiritual qi, and even requested for an infinite supply of spiritual qi, the cost would be even higher. If one calculated carefully, spending spirit stones in Green Mountain residence was roughly equivalent to splitting the spiritual qi in a high-grade spirit stone into 10,000 portions. Then they sold it for 1 spirit stone each. One had to know that although in theory, the exchange rate for high, medium, and low-grade spirit stones was 100 in the cultivation world, due to the preciousness of high-grade spirit stones, this ratio was always higher and never lower. If they exchanged for it like this, they would undoubtedly make a huge profit. Under such circumstances, wouldn't they be fools not to take advantage of it? All the cultivators began to exchange spirit stones for the wooden tokens. However, they were relatively cautious. They were afraid that Green Mountain residents would suddenly run away, so they did not charge their card too much in one go. Most of them were rational and only charged their card for a day or 2. A small number of them charged more, but none exceeded 10 days. However, on this day, Jiang Li received 13,000 low-grade spirit stones. Moreover, after enjoying the spiritual qi environment and cultivation chamber of Green Mountain residence, how many people could leave it? Take Jiang Li, for example. Ever since he started cultivating, he had always been using his cheat cultivation speed and had never stopped. If he suddenly removed all the enhancements in his cultivation, he would probably not know how to cultivate in a normal spiritual qi environment. Therefore, Green Mountain Ascetics' Green Mountain residence became famous in Nightless City. Countless cultivators fought to stay there. The number of cultivators who stayed there was even higher. This caused the name of Green Mountain Ascetic, who had just arrived in Nightless City not long ago, to spread throughout the entire city overnight. Green Mountain residents in the outer city area also opened soon after. However, because Qi Refinement Realm rogue cultivators were usually quite thick-skinned, at least 3 or 4 out of 10 people could sit in the hall and cultivate by absorbing spiritual Qi for free. Therefore, Jiang Li did not use spiritual Qi to fill the environment of the Green Mountain residents in the outer city. They could only enjoy high-grade spiritual Qi in the cultivation room after paying spirit stones. Regarding this, the rogue cultivators were quite dissatisfied, but no one dared to cause trouble in the territory of a golden core cultivator. Everything was gradually getting on track. The clone and Qin Shuman were still discussing and preparing to plan a huge show to promote the Green Mountain residents. For example, after a rogue cultivator with mediocre aptitude was humiliated by a sect genius, he would cultivate diligently at the Green Mountain residence. After a period of time, the rogue cultivator would catch up and break through to the next level. He would kill the genius and finally obtain the love of his life. Jiang Li did not believe that those rogue cultivators would not get brainwashed by these kinds of stories if he kept promoting them. While the Nine Nether clone established his business empire in Nightless City, Jiang Li's main body took out a spiritual fruit from the guest room of the Shu Mountain Water Element Peak. Chapter 183, Soul-Igniting Ghost Lantern. The surface of the spiritual fruit in Jiang Li's hand was smooth and plump, and its color was crimson red like fire. Just holding it in his hand made it feel very appetizing. This was a fire attribute 9 Nether Earth fruit. Jiang Li had been very vexed previously. Was he going to consume the water attribute or the fire attribute 9 Nether fruit? From the looks of it, he could only obtain one more artificial spiritual root after consuming the 9 Nether Earth fruit. Water attribute spiritual Qi could augment his 9 Nether spiritual Qi and increase the power of the spiritual Qi. On the other hand, even if the fire attribute spiritual Qi cultivation method was ordinary, it could still obtain the enhancement of the 9 Nether spiritual Qi and possess extraordinary might. Jiang Li was originally conflicted about these two choices. But later on, he realized that he had fallen into a thinking trap. If he needed water attribute spiritual Qi, why did he have to cultivate it by himself? If he got other water attribute cultivators to help him and give him a few shots of spiritual Qi, the effect would be the same. Back then, after the first competition ended, Jiang Li went to look for senior sister Qi Yu. Although he did not find her and was later interrupted by the Immortal Ascension Pavilion's attack, Jiang Li did not forget this matter. After returning to the sect, he went to look for senior sister Qi Yu again. Senior sister Qi Yu, who was ranked on the goddess ranking board, was tired to the point where her face was red and covered in sweat, and her cherry lips opened slightly as she breathed continuously. He left in satisfaction afterwards. He received a new status. A large amount of water attribute spiritual Qi entered the body. The 5 elements complement each other. Added status: Water Spirit Life Wood Foundation Establishment. Water Spirit Life Wood Foundation Establishment would attribute spiritual Qi recovery speed increases by 100%, would attribute spiritual Qi strength increases by 50%, health points recover 15 points per second, fire resistance increases by 30 points. Duration: 10 minutes, minus plus. After Jiang Li made this status last for an infinite amount of time, it was equivalent to permanently having senior sister Qi Yu use her spell on him. Although senior sister Qi Yu's combat strength was not very strong, she was also one of the best disciples in the Rejuvenation Hall. She was also at the Foundation Establishment realm, so the quality of her spiritual Qi was naturally not bad, and it brought Jiang Li the help of taking a step further. This was equivalent to a Foundation Establishment water attribute cultivator continuously instilling spiritual qi into him. This effect was much better than eating a 9 nether earth fruit and casually cultivating a cultivation method. Therefore, Jiang Li finally decided to get himself a fire attribute spiritual root. Crack. When the fiery red earth fruit entered his stomach, the smell was dense and fragrant. It was different from the wood yin earth fruit. Soon, a strange feeling quickly arose in his body. This was the feeling when an artificial spiritual root grew. Jiang Li felt that wonderful experience. He casually took out a volcano ore and crushed it in his hand. The fire attribute spiritual qi that surged out from it was immediately captured clearly by him. This was the disadvantage of the water element peak. The fire attribute spiritual qi was suppressed to a tragic state. However, Jiang Li did not mind. He used the talisman paper to set up the array formation. After isolating the spiritual qi in the room from the outside world, he pulled out the storage bag at his waist and poured out a pile of high-quality volcano rocks. He took out a gourd of red ginseng wine from inside, removed the stopper, and poured all of it on the pile of volcanic rocks. Immediately, a ball of fire rose and the strong smell of alcohol filled the room. With Jiang Li's physique, he was also overwhelmed by the smell of alcohol. If one drank this, even a golden core cultivator would probably have a dream for 3 days. The combined price of these volcano rocks and red ginseng wine was at least 3,000 spirit stones. In fact, they could not be bought on the market that easily. However, he did not have to worry. These things were all brought along by the Immortal Ascension Pavilion. After all, it was an investment for his future, so Jiang Li naturally would not be careless. After setting up the cultivation environment, he was only lacking a suitable fire attribute cultivation method. It just so happened that among the many fire attribute cultivation methods, there was a cultivation method that he was familiar with and was sufficiently powerful. It could be used at this time. Naturally, it was the Shu Mountain Sword technique that the sword cultivator clone cultivated, the liquor fire sword song. Now Jiang Li had a fire attribute spiritual root, artificial, and a sword heart talent pseudo. What was wrong with cultivating the liquor fire sword song? After removing his clothes, he stepped into the raging fire and sat cross-legged on the pile of volcanic rocks. He was burned by the fierce spirit fire, but unfortunately, with Jiang Li's current fire resistance, it was still too far away to injure him. Ordinarily, it would take a period of time for an ordinary spiritual root seed to grow a proper spiritual root. However, as a cultivator who cultivated the 9 nether Tao scripture and the owner of a 9 nether branch, Jiang Li had a way to accelerate this process. In next to no time, Jiang Li, who was within the flames, sensed the cultivation that surged into his body. With his understanding of the liquor fire sword song, it was impossible for him to make a mistake. He successfully completed the qi circulation in his body. An endless stream of fire attribute cultivation began to be refined by him, and the blazing wine and fire qi that filled his body was swept into his body and transformed into the cultivation of the liquor fire sword song. Coupled with the water, wood, and fire, the enhancement of the 9 nether spiritual qi, and the endless flow of high-grade spiritual qi, the first spiritual qi he cultivated was of extremely high quality. The spiritual qi of the initial stage qi refinement realm was almost on par with the spiritual qi of the late-stage qi refinement realm. Even Jiang Li did not expect that the fire attribute spiritual root that he originally thought was just better than nothing could actually reach this level. However, as his cultivation level increased rapidly, Jiang Li discovered that he had made a rather serious mistake. The 9 nether earth fruit he consumed contained a fire attribute cultivation base that had reached the peak of the qi refinement realm. On the other hand, the liquor fire sword song was not a monstrous cultivation method like the 9 nether Tao scripture. It did not require the spiritual qi quantity of several normal cultivation methods. In other words, just by eating this 9 nether earth fruit, he could advance the liquor fire sword song to the 9th level of the Qi refinement realm. Now, with the help of so many cultivation statuses, his cultivation level actually headed straight for the foundation establishment realm. Jiang Li was shocked. If he reached the foundation establishment realm with an artificial spiritual root, then his future cultivation path would at least be 10 times more difficult. He quickly pulled over the 2 parallel mines for an emergency meeting. At this moment, the sword cultivator clone was flying in the sky and hurrying along. When he was called by Jiang Li, he almost fell from the sky. He hurriedly lay on the burning rainbow sword before answering Jiang Li. As soon as they communicated, it was fortunate that the sword cultivator clone had a deep understanding of the liquor fire sword song. He had also learned it in the secret treasure vault of Shu Mountain for a few months. Only then did he immediately recall the life-sacrificial technique inside. Blood-dripping sword pill. This was also a spell technique that consumed a lot of energy. Sword cultivators also knew it, but he had never used it before. This was because for ordinary cultivators, if they used this spell technique a few times, they might die directly. Just as the liquor fire sword song was about to break through to the foundation establishment realm, Jiang Li's expression suddenly turned pale. His fire attribute cultivation level also decreased 3 times. In the end, his cultivation level in the 9 nether earth fruit was completely exhausted. Only then did his liquor fire cultivation level safely stop at the 9th level of Qi refinement. He took out the gourd that contained the red ginseng wine and spat out 3 small blood-red beads. It was no wonder that sword cultivators who did not know sacrificial techniques were not good sword cultivators. He was a fake sword cultivator who had just started cultivating for a few hours, but he could actually use a life-sacrificing move like the blood-dripping sword pill. Each of the 3 sword pills condensed a large amount of his spiritual qi cultivation and 5 years of lifespan. The 30 years of lifespan after eating the 9 nether earth fruit had yet to be used, but in the blink of an eye, half of it had disappeared. Jiang Li puckered his lips and stood up from the extinguished fire. He opened his mouth and took a deep breath, and then he swept away the smell of alcohol that still suffused the air and stored it away. He opened his palm and with a thought, an explosive spirit fire immediately rose from his palm, burning the air and distorting it. Under such circumstances, Jiang Li mobilized a bit of the 9 nether spiritual qi in his body and enhanced it with the liquor fire spiritual qi. Immediately, the spirit fire that was originally burning gently rose to the height of a person. Its color became dark green, and just looking at it made one's hair stand on end. Jiang Li hurriedly extinguished the spirit fire, but the roof above was already charred black. Fortunately, he was quite cautious when using his spiritual qi. Otherwise, if he used more spiritual qi, he would be able to directly tear down the roof. However, the liquor fire spiritual qi that was enhanced by the 9 nether spiritual qi did not disappoint Jiang Li. This degree was already sufficient to serve as icing on the cake for him. However, icing on the cake was not his ultimate goal. Up until now, Jiang Li was actually only preparing. He turned to look at a large vat in the room. He had just asked a female cultivator from the water element peak for it. There were still some water stains and a few flower petals in the vat. She did not know what they were used for. However, regardless of its original use, Jiang Li was prepared to use it to boil himself into soup. Jiang Li wanted to refine his 5th beast blood tattoo here. Previously, after returning to the sect after the competition ended, Elder He actually wanted to help Jiang Li find a new beast blood tattoo. However, Jiang Li found an excuse to temporarily decline. Later on, Elder He thought about it and said that the mystic realm on the side of the Shu Mountain 5 Elements Peak happened to have some decent demon beasts locked inside. It just so happened that he wanted to make a trip to Shu Mountain. He got Jiang Li to bring the medicinal herbs needed for the beast blood diagram to Shu Mountain and find beast blood to condense the blood tattoo. This suited Jiang Li's thoughts perfectly, but in the Demon Vanquishing Hall's storeroom, he immediately took away 2 sets of medicine. That was because Jiang Li planned to condense 2 blood tattoos in a short period of time. Furthermore, the beast blood material he wanted to use was too special. It was not convenient for others to know about it, so he deliberately avoided Elder He and condensed the beast blood tattoo alone. It was a mystical fish that should have been extinct since ancient times, ghost lantern fish. Due to the 2 golden core sword cultivators slaughtering the southern seal kingdom, the Mother River's graveyard was practically at the center of the storm. If someone discovered the ghost lantern fish living there, and he brazenly took out such an ancient fish, it was obvious that he was related to that place. Therefore, he could not even let Elder He know about his ghost lantern fish. "My little cuties, I'm going to need your help this time." Jiang Li took out a sealed wooden barrel from his storage bag. Now that the yin burial coffin was not by his side, he could only make do with it. He tore off the talisman paper and opened the lid of the barrel. Thick yin qi spread out. In the wooden barrel, 9 fat, ugly, and ghost-faced ghost lantern fish were wriggling uneasily. Today, they seemed to have sensed that something was amiss. The ancient fish that had been carefree for countless years finally had a human raise their butcher's knife at them. Jiang Li grabbed a ghost lantern fish in his hand and allowed it to struggle and sway in his hand, but no matter what, it was unable to escape this demonic palm. Even the most powerful weapon of the ghost lantern fish, the soul-igniting ghost lantern, was no longer a threat. That was because a small cloth bag was wrapped around its ghost lantern. The bag was so tightly wrapped that the flames could not reach the outside world. This was a method that Jiang Li finally found after going through the ancient records of the 2 sects. The ghost lantern fish's ghost lantern flame could burn souls and destroy ghosts. It was abnormally terrifying, but its temperature was really not high. In fact, it was a little cold. Therefore, it could not even burn through a thin layer of cloth. After raising the fish for so long, it was finally time to use them. Jiang Li raised his blade and slashed down. First, he cut off the ghost lamp hanging on the front of the ghost lantern fish's head, and then he cut open the fish's stomach. After putting away the black fish blood, he directly took out the still beating heart. There was not much fish blood, but with the combination of the 9 ghost lantern fish, it was probably enough for him to draw a beast blood tattoo. After some processing, Jiang Li obtained a small basin of black fish blood and 9 still beating hearts. He grabbed the huge water vat with one hand and placed the huge vat filled with water liquid on the ground. He did not put away the pile of volcanic rocks after cultivating just now. He raised his hand and threw out a ball of spirit fire. The raging flames burned on the volcano stone, quickly boiling the water in the large vat. He poured the medicine into it one by one and strictly followed the steps. This time, he was very lucky. Under the situation where the fire was completely under his control, he finally did not fail. After pouring the ghost lantern fish's heart and blood, the entire vat of medicine became pitch black. As it boiled and rolled, it emitted an unbearable stench. Jiang Li subconsciously took a step back. His body instinctively resisted the black water, but he was determined to obtain the ghost lantern fish's flames. Jiang Li gritted his teeth and jumped in as well. He endured the nausea caused by the stench and instinctively resisted as he circulated the beast blood diagram. After entering the mental world again, the 9 ghost lantern fish formed by the blood fog appeared. The fish blood was black, so the ghost lantern fish formed from the blood fiend was naturally black as well. However, although the ghost lantern fish was weak, these 9 blood demons were quite troublesome. What did the ghost lantern fish eat over a long period of time? Ghosts. Without the obstruction of the body, after a person turned into a ghost, they would absorb and accumulate all kinds of bad things in their surroundings. Some sects would even think that ghosts were the gathering of all negative things. As for the ghost lantern fish that ate ghosts all year round, its blood naturally accumulated such a large amount of spiritual filth. This was also the reason why its fish blood was black. Wherever the 9 ghost lantern fish passed, The ground in Jiang Li's mental world was dyed pitch black. Affected by the black blood of the ghost lantern fish, added status, mental pollution. Mental pollution, negative emotions are amplified and malicious hallucinations are born. Mind attribute decreases by 20%, enlightenment decreases by 30%. Duration, 6 months, minus plus. Golden core Tao heart activated. A portion of mental pollution is resisted. Duration reduced. Jiang Li's brows twitched violently when he saw this. These fish were truly too much. Even if they were fighting spiritually, why were they polluting his mental world? They were too disgusting. The sword cultivator clone immediately slashed out with the sword heart active, turning the 9 ghost lantern fish into black fog. Under the illumination of the full moon and moonlight that had fused with the sword heart, the originally weak black fog quickly melted away, leaving only a black hole in the mental world. After pressing the minus button for 5 seconds, the pitch-black filth in his mental world slowly faded away. On the other hand, Jiang Li had finally obtained the beast blood tattoo that belonged to the ghost lantern fish. Beast blood diagram has successfully absorbed beast blood, added status, ghost lantern blood tattoo. Ghost lantern blood tattoo, mind attribute +1, nurturing talent soul igniting ghost lantern. Duration, 1 day minus plus. Chapter 184, Under the Peach Blossom. After all, these ghost lantern fish had not become spirits. It was already unexpected that they could bring Jiang Li some attributes. However, when he saw the soul-igniting ghost lantern that he wanted, Jiang Li heaved a sigh of relief. He had already used the 9 nether earth fruit and the beast blood diagram. Wasn't this what he wanted? If he still could not succeed, he could only try the Bodhisattva Heart Sutra again. Fortunately, these investments were not wasted. Behind Jiang Li, 9 sinister-looking ghost lantern fish transformed into black tattoos that slowly emitted a dim light. He could sense that a ghost lamp was slowly forming in his body. He closed his eyes and waited for a moment. A stream of yin attribute spiritual qi and a stream of fire attribute spiritual qi slowly combined in his palm. After spinning for a long time, an extremely fine flame ignited with a puff. The flame was extremely weak and its color was not pure. Even if it burned his soul, it could only cause pain and discomfort. That was because these 9 ghost lantern fish had not become spirits. The ghost lantern blood tattoo condensed from their blood was naturally very weak. Not only was the effect poor, but it could only be maintained for a day. If not for Jiang Li's cheat, he would be a fool to risk mental pollution to use the ghost lantern fish blood. It would still take some time to nurture a complete soul-igniting ghost lantern talent. However, before that, with the combination of the fire attribute spiritual root, he finally had the ability to refine the ghost lantern cold flame. He opened a wooden box that had been placed at the side. Inside were 9 ghost lanterns that Jiang Li had just cut and were still very fresh. This thing was rare even in the ancient times. The details of its use were not recorded in the records of the Shu Mountain 5 Elements Peak. However, in Jiang Li's case, he picked up a ghost lamp and stuffed it into his mouth before swallowing it. If he did this before obtaining the talent of the soul-igniting ghost lantern, he would be courting death. His soul would be completely burned away, and he would not even have the chance to reincarnate. However, with this talent, even if it was not complete, the situation would be different. Although Jiang Li's soul-igniting ghost lantern was still very weak, it was enough to make him immune to this kind of soul-igniting effect. After the most terrifying soul-igniting effect was resisted, how could this ownerless ghost lantern cold flame have any room to resist Jiang Li, a fire attribute cultivator? Relying on the liquor fire sword song and the soul-igniting ghost lantern, he easily refined this ghost lantern cold flame. After that, a similar dark cold flame appeared in Jiang Li's mental world. Jiang Li placed these ghost lantern fish in the yin burial coffin. After raising them for so long, the strength of their cold flames was far greater than those of the underwater graveyard. Now it saved him a lot of trouble. Immediately, the remaining 8 ghost lights were swallowed and refined by him. After another period of time, with a thought from Jiang Li, 9 black ghost lantern cold flames suddenly appeared behind him and quietly burned in the air. This flame was not hot or fierce, but as long as a living ghost took a glance at it, they would feel the fear in their souls. With a snap of his fingers, the 9 ghost lantern cold flames disappeared in the blink of an eye as if they had never existed. Although this was not a heaven and earth spirit fire, its threat was not inferior to that. Knock knock tilde. At this moment, a series of knocks sounded. Jiang Li noticed that after a night of cultivation, the sky outside had already lit up. The tainted blood on his body had already disappeared under the cleansing status. With a wave of his hand, 9 nether spiritual chi surged out. Soon, the roots of the 9 nether wood woven a fitting white disciple uniform on his body. When he opened the door, Jiang Li's expression changed slightly because the person standing at the door was familiar yet unfamiliar. Senior sister, hello. Black hair mixed with strands of ice blue hair fluttered in the morning breeze, emitting a faint and gentle glow under the morning sun. If it was the sword cultivator clone standing here, he would definitely subconsciously reach out to touch the other party's hair and face. This cold and elegant female cultivator was the girlfriend of Jiang Li's sword cultivator clone, water sword Shuangmeng. Fortunately, a cultivation method at the level of the Bodhisattva Heart Sutra would not make such a low-level mistake. Therefore, Jiang Li only knew her and did not have any additional feelings. Junior brother, Jiang Li, I hope I didn't disturb you by knocking on your door. The female cultivator, Shuangmeng, glanced past Jiang Li and saw a mess in the room. There was an extinguished fire and a large vat that had been burnt to a color. There were burn marks on the roof, and the room was filled with a strange mist. She did not know what had happened to this small guest room last night. In any case, it could no longer be used. It's fine, don't worry. Oh, about this. I went overboard cultivating yesterday. Sorry. Jiang Li followed the other party's gaze and noticed that this guest room had already been messed up by him. At that moment, he also felt a little embarrassed. He ran to their place as a guest and nearly burned their house on the first day. There's no need to worry about this matter. Junior brother Jiang Li cultivates so hard. No wonder you can become the #1 chi refinement cultivator in the Great Mountain region at such a young age. Shuangmeng admires you. Our Shu Mountain's hospitality is lacking. We should have prepared a quiet room for junior brother. The female cultivator, Shuangmeng, had a relatively calm personality. When she spoke or handled matters, she had a gentle and tasteless indifference, but there was always a hint of worry between her brows. This was because ever since Jiang Li's clone, the sword cultivator Tang Yan, had returned from the brink of death, he had become especially busy. Although he was not cold to her and had become stronger, he had still obtained the 4th place in the Foundation Establishment realm for Shu Mountain in the Great Mountain Cultivator competition a few days ago. However, as the difference in their strength grew greater and greater, many worries arose in her heart. Moreover, a few days ago, the sword cultivator clone had just recovered from his injuries and had left them behind to leave the mountain alone. This made her feel even more worried. Junior brother Jiang Li, don't worry about it. There will be someone to clean up this place. You should follow me first. Our elders have invited you. Elders? That was true. Jiang Li had accepted the invitation to come to Shu Mountain as a guest. He could not let him stay in the small courtyard alone for a few days before returning home. Naturally, someone had to come and receive him. He followed water sword Shuangmeng to a certain place. Along the way, there was a small bridge with flowing water and the music of the bowstring. As expected of the water element peak, where female cultivators made up more than 90% of the population. This level of literary arts was even better than the rejuvenation hall of the scripture storage valley. However, the muscular Jiang Li seemed a little out of place in this environment. Soon, a huge peach tree and a courtyard sat on it appeared in front of him. On a steep cliff that was grown by a huge peach tree, the branches were lush and split, and the pink peach blossoms were as brilliant as the clouds. The thick tree trunk leaned out diagonally, and a silver dragon-like waterfall flowed past it, falling straight into the 9 heavens. The courtyard was built on the peach tree that looked like a paradise in a painting. Even Jiang Li could not help but sigh with emotion. This elder really knew how to enjoy life. The location of this small courtyard was really elegant and unique. Junior brother Jiang Li, watch your step. Water Sword Shuang Meng reminded Jiang Li before stepping on an exposed tree root and walking towards the tree. Jiang Li could fly and walk in the air, so there was naturally no possibility of him falling down. Therefore, the other party did not mean that he would fall to his death, but that there was an array formation surrounding the peach tree. He had to follow closely and not move around recklessly. Jiang Li did as he was told and followed the other party's footsteps. Soon, they arrived at the entrance of the small courtyard. It was one thing to build a wooden house on a tree, but to actually build a small courtyard, this peach tree was really a little big. Only in the cultivation world with spiritual qi could such a situation happen. If it was on Earth in his previous life, it would be impossible. Knock, knock, knock. Elder Mu, junior brother Jiang Li is here. Come in. She knocked on the door. As a unique female voice sounded, the door slowly opened, revealing the simple furnishings in the courtyard under the peach blossom tree. There was a stone table and a few wooden chairs. Beside them was a simple swing tied to the trunk of a peach tree. This was all. Behind the stone table, a woman was sitting on a wooden chair and slowly drinking tea. Beside her stood a familiar, elegant figure. It was Xianxia. Greetings, Elder Mu. I'm Jiang Li from the Scripture Storage Valley. Senior sister Shuang Meng took her leave, whereas Jiang Li took 2 steps forward, cupped his hands, and bowed. After that, he winked at Xianxia. I know about you, Jiang Li. You're the disciple of the Scripture Storage Valley's elder he. You're indeed a good lad. No Shu Mountain disciple can match your vitality. Come and sit. Elder Mu put down the teacup and waved at Jiang Li with a smile. Her smile was gentle, and it seemed that she was in a good mood when she saw Jiang Li. Elder, you praised me too much. The Shu Mountain sword cultivators are peerless in the world. I was just a little lucky. As he spoke modestly, Jiang Li decisively went forward and sat opposite Elder Mu, and he skillfully took out 2 beautifully wrapped gifts. It's my first time visiting. Elder, please don't mind my small gesture. Junior sister Xianxia, long time no see. There were 2 gifts. One was pushed to Elder Mu and the other was handed to Xianxia. Elder Mu was clearly stunned. In the Shu Mountain 5 Elements Peak, where the moral standards was excellent, gifts were practically non-existent. Even if they were given, it was usually given to the juniors by the elders. She was not used to Jiang Li's adult-like action. On the other hand, Xianxia blushed as she received the long gift box, and then she actually handed a small box to Jiang Li. After that, her face became even redder. What Jiang Li gave Elder Mu was a bronze mirror that could reflect her appearance at a clear angle. What he gave Xianxia was a brush made of fine hairs. They were not valuable things. They were really just small gifts to show his appreciation. What a sensible child. You saved my daughter Xianxia yesterday. We haven't thanked you yet, so how can we accept your gift? This Elder Mu was actually Xianxia's mother. That swing in the courtyard was probably made for Xianxia back then. On a closer look, the 2 of them indeed had many similarities in their eyebrows. However, Elder Mu's voice was a little special, or rather, her accent was a little different. Perhaps she came from a remote place, or perhaps she could even be from a foreign location. It was no wonder that she was the one receiving Jiang Li today. As a mother, she naturally had to thank her daughter's savior. Elder Mu declined several times, but Jiang Li insisted on giving it to her. In the end, after she found out that the gift was really not worth anything, she reluctantly accepted it. "Martial nephew, Jiang Li, I see that your cultivation is about to reach the foundation establishment realm." After a short conversation, the relationship between Elder Mu and Jiang Li had obviously improved greatly. Elder Mu stood up and poured a cup of peach blossom tea for Jiang Li. The pink tea was translucent and tempting, and its fragrance assaulted the nose. "Yes, I was fortunate enough to cultivate to the 9th stage Qi refinement realm a few days ago. I'm currently preparing for the foundation establishment realm." Xianxia Kyuhua's mother's perception was really not bad. She could see his mind, qi, and spirit at first glance, and her second glance could roughly see his cultivation level. Fortunately, the 9 Nether Dao scripture had its own unique points. Some sensitive things were not discovered by others. "Yes, that's good. Martial nephew Jiang Li, you might not know this, but disciples of our Shu Mountain 5 Elements Peak have to undergo the test of a mystic realm before reaching foundation establishment. That mystic realm is dangerous but has special opportunities. I wonder if you're willing to go with Kyuhua. The two of you can take care of each other together." Jiang Li's eyes lit up. He knew that the main topic was here. The other party spoke politely, but in fact, that mystic realm was a treatment that only the disciples of the Shu Mountain 5 Elements Peak could enjoy. Its status was second only to the Shu Mountain Sword Pool. It was probably because Jiang Li had saved Xianxia Kyuhua that the Shu Mountain 5 Elements Peak made an exception and gave him the opportunity. After learning from Elder He that Shu Mountain was going to give him an opportunity, he naturally searched the memories of the sword cultivator clone. He had also roughly learned some information about that mystic realm. To him, a mystic realm that even Qi refinement realm cultivators could go to was not anything close to danger, and it was indeed beneficial to his foundation establishment. There was naturally no reason for him to not agree, so he expressed his gratitude decisively. They chatted for a long time and even talked about many interesting things about Xianxia Kyuhua. When they talked about the little princess of the Xianxia clan who had always been serious to the outside world, they almost could not maintain her image. Half a day later, Jiang Li left the other party's courtyard. However, they had yet to mention the sword pool. It seemed that the Shu Mountain 5 Elements Peak did not plan to give him another flying sword. Jiang Li scratched his head and was slightly disappointed. However, this was natural. Others did not know that he had cultivated the Shu Mountain sword technique, so it was impossible for them to impart the Shu Mountain sword technique to a disciple of another sect. Naturally, they would not give the precious and powerful Shu Mountain flying sword to a person who had a sword heart, but did not cultivate their sword technique. Without a flying sword, it seemed that he could only use his clone's burning rainbow sword in the future. Speaking of the sword cultivator clone, he was currently flying somewhere in the sky, using the cloud cover to fly unnoticed. In the mountain range below him, a rogue cultivator was rushing through the dense forest. His clothes were a little different from most rogue cultivators. He was not carrying things everywhere. Instead, he was wearing light clothes. A certain aura concealment technique hid the aura of the rogue cultivator, allowing him to quickly and safely pass through this continuous and dangerous mountain range. Chapter 185, Evil Ruins. The sword cultivator clone was the Shu Mountain Fire Peak's burning rainbow sword master, Tang Yan. At this moment, he was hiding in the sky for the sake of tracking the rogue cultivator below. That rogue cultivator was none other than the black sword-wielding Wuxia who had fought Jiang Li earlier. This rogue cultivator was really unlucky. He held a great surprise weapon in his hand and could have gone against anyone, but he just had to face Jiang Li. Not only had he lost, but the famous black sword and the metal bracelet with an unknown use had been snatched away. He had no place to complain. Since he was in the ring, even if he was beaten to death, no one could find fault with the opponent. Moreover, Jiang Li had only taken away 2 spoils of war. This was already an extremely benevolent display. However, because he was missing the black sword that practically ignored spiritual qi, His strength could be said to have drastically decreased, and he performed extremely poorly in the competition later on. Not to mention that he had suffered considerable injuries and was unable to enter the top 100. In the end, not a single sect took a fancy to him. He participated in this competition full of confidence, but in the end, he suffered a double loss. Damn it, Jiang Li, damn the sects, you forced me, you forced me. It won't be long. When I obtain the power, I'll definitely trample all of you under my feet. After gritting his teeth and cursing all the sect disciples he knew, Wuxia quickened his footsteps. Jiang Li's main body and the 9 nether clone had things to do and could not leave. Therefore, he could only control the sword cultivator clone to track him after his injuries recovered. In the bazaar of the Misty Mountain Range, Wuxia left alone after recovering from his injuries for a few days and headed in a certain direction. By the time the clone arrived, although he had already flown hundreds of kilometers, it was not a problem. During the process of the battle, Jiang Li had already planted a few special seeds on him. As long as the distance was not too far or there was no special spatial barrier, he would not lose the target. Several days had already passed since Wuxia started traveling, and his speed gradually slowed down for some reason. In the beginning, he was not in a hurry to travel. Instead, he began to wander aimlessly in the surrounding area. Could it be that he had discovered that the clone was following him? He was a chi refinement rogue cultivator. It could not be. Jiang Li did not act rashly. After observing for a period of time, he felt that the guy did not seem to have discovered him, but rather was searching for something. It was not until he found a human village and did something inside that he finally carried a black belt and left in a straight line. That place was already not far. In the end, the figure of the rogue cultivator, Wuxia, disappeared after entering a strange basin terrain. This is. The sword cultivator clone flying in the sky carefully observed the basin. Jiang Li, who had already returned to his small courtyard, was comparing the detailed map of the area. He did find the terrain on the map, but the basin terrain was not labeled. This was a little abnormal. This was an exquisite map produced by the Scripture Storage Valley. Even if it was not named, it should have an indication. However, the person who drew the map seemed to have forgotten about this place and did not write anything. Wait, there was something wrong with the cracks near the basin. Looking down from a high altitude, Jiang Li discovered that the basin looked a little too squarish. Moreover, those small rift valleys that were spreading out looked like cracks that spread out when he punched the ground. If he were to remove all the plants and trees, the shape and traces seemed to be the traces of the square heaven seal. Jiang Li had seen Chu Yongxuan use the square heaven seal twice, so he had a little understanding of this ultimate technique. If this basin could be seen as the trace of the square heaven seal, then could the 2 shallow and deep ravines at the side be the sword slash of a certain sword cultivator? Compared to the sword cultivator clone, if the marks on the ground were magnified many times, it did not seem to be much different. If that's true, this is too exaggerated. The more Jiang Li looked at it, the more it looked like it. He could not help but gasp. Could it be that a huge battle had happened here a long time ago? The participants included the Shu Mountain people and the upper echelons of the Scripture Storage Valley. In this world, not to mention grabbing the stars and destroying the moon, just this ability to change the terrain alone was enough to shock Jiang Li for several weeks. How terrifying! I wonder when I can reach this level. After using 2 spirit talismans to conceal his figure, Jiang Li controlled his clone to descend and fall into the basin. The height difference in the basin was huge, almost at a vertical angle. Moreover, there were no special patterns that were produced by the geological change on the mountain wall. It should be due to an external force forcefully breaking the ground. The vegetation here was quite dense. Clearly, a considerable amount of time had passed since the battle. It seemed possible that the ruins from back then could contain certain treasures. The rogue cultivator, Wuxia, was no longer here. He made 2 hand seals, and a few seeds that were hidden in the other party's body quietly emerged. They also emitted a pheromone that humans could not smell. In the hand of the sword cultivator clone, there was a sapling that looked similar to a bean sprout. Ever since he started cultivating, he had asked Yan Hong to help him collect all kinds of seeds. Later on, whenever he went to a place, he would deliberately collect them. For a long time, they had been very effective, and he had discovered many spiritual plants with miraculous effects. This bean sprout seedling was extremely sensitive to the smell and fluctuation of its own kind. It could help Jiang Li locate its target accurately within a certain range. Soon the sapling reacted. It swayed its sprout and pointed in a direction. With some caution, the clone carefully explored the area. Along the way, he did not discover any ambushes or traps. Soon he discovered a rock ahead. It was placed rather abruptly. Looking at the marks on the ground, it was obvious that this stone had been moved by someone in a short period of time. A shallow friction belt appeared on the ground, and the sprout in his hand was pointing at the bottom of the stone. Perhaps it was because this place was too remote and very few people passed by, so they let down their guard and did not deal with the traces properly. He casually waved his spiritual chi and moved the rock away, revealing a deep crack in the rock. This small crack was probably the coincidence of a natural geological change. He gestured at the width, and it was probably only enough for the child to turn sideways and barely pass through. However, he could hear the wind inside, and the sapling in his hand was pointing down. It seemed that he had to go in. Nothing ventured, nothing gained. Fortunately, this was only a clone. Even if he really lost it, Jiang Li would at most feel heartache. It was harmless to take a slight risk. After adjusting his status, the sword cultivator clone's body suddenly began to change shape. The joints between the bones separated, causing his body to change shape like a piece of mud. Even his head became even more flat. This was the bone-shrinking transformation technique that he had killed a rogue cultivator. It was not a powerful spell technique, but it was barely useful at certain times. Jiang Li had never carefully practiced this spell technique before, but it was not difficult for him to squeeze a crack in the rock. The clone stuffed his body into the crack and moved down bit by bit. This crack was unexpectedly deep. Moreover, the surface was extremely rough. If one were to be stuck here, they would truly not be able to respond to anything. The clone squeezed for more than 70 meters before finally landing. What entered his sight was pitch black. The sunlight could not touch this underground space at all. A series of crisp sounds could be heard. In 2 breaths, the displaced bones on his body had all returned to their original positions. Immediately, the burning rainbow sword was unsheathed, and a ball of flames immediately lit up the entire space. There were no enemies, and this caused Jiang Li to relax slightly. After crawling for dozens of meters in the narrow space, even he felt a little uncomfortable. Looking around, there was no doubt that this was an artificial underground tunnel. The rocks used to build this tunnel were quite huge. Judging from the size, they were at least 3 times the size of the pyramid's rocks. It was also because the path was built very firmly and buried deep underground that it was barely preserved in the battle back then. However, at a glance, there were many collapsed and dislocated areas in the passageway. The place where they entered earlier was the dislocation point between 2 large rocks. A crack that suddenly split due to geological reasons coincided with this displacement point. Under such a coincidence, it opened up this passageway and finally caused the ruin to be discovered again. The clone touched a mark on the wall of the passageway. Although it was a little blurry due to the passage of time, it could still be vaguely seen that it was a black lotus. He took out the sprout and placed it in his palm before continuing in the direction the sprout pointed. The underground space was quite large. The corridor was long and quiet, giving people a sense of oppression. Because the clone was in a place that was too quiet, his ears actually began to ring slightly. It was just like how in the darkness, the pupils of the eyes would enlarge to capture more light. In places that were too quiet, The hearing system would also tighten the eardrums in order to make the hearing sharper. After walking for a distance, Jiang Li felt that he had gone deeper underground after several turns. Along the way, he saw many patterns on the wall. Apart from the sinister black lotus flowers, there were also a large number of damaged paintings on some of the walls. Some of the patterns were twisted and abstract, even worse than primitive paintings. Some were neat and exquisite. Several completely different styles gathered together, giving people an indescribable feeling of madness. The sword cultivator clone only took a few more glances at the mural before feeling the world spin. He vomited. Jiang Li, who had been watching the live broadcast, was also slightly uncomfortable. Even his golden core Dao heart was unable to completely resist the influence of a mere mural. Due to the fact that he had been eating fasting pills all this time, there was nothing in the stomach of the sword cultivator clone. After spitting out gastric fluids for a long time, he barely recovered. However, he still had lingering fears about this mural. That chaotic feeling could only be said to be very terrible. Although this ruin was ancient, it really had something. There was clearly no spiritual chi fluctuation, but it could purely use images to make a foundation establishment cultivator dizzy and vomit. Such a thing was simply unheard of. However, he was still curious about what was writ in such a strange mural. But what can be done to avoid that kind of visual confusion? After some thought, the clone tried to block some of his vision and only looked at a single painting. As expected, the chaotic dizziness did not appear again. He could barely see the pattern on it. Regardless of the style, this mural displayed extremely bloody and cruel things. On the broken limbs and bones, they danced and sang loudly, worshipping the deities in the land of blood. There were also things like cutting open the abdomen and removing the heart, cooking the bones of humans, and all sorts of evil deeds that made one's hair stand on end. If one looked at these murals together, it seemed to be describing a massacre and a sacrificial ritual. Now Jiang Li still did not know which faction this ruin actually belonged to. However, it was obvious that the owner of this place was not a good person. He just did not know what they were doing. That was probably why this place had been attacked and completely ruined, and in the end, he had been unable to find any traces on the map. If the scripture storage valley really participated in this matter, Jiang Li might be able to find some relevant clues. However, it was precisely because of that battle that Jiang Li had the possibility of taking advantage of the situation now. Otherwise, even if no one was guarding it, just the defensive array formation in the underground passageway would make Jiang Li helpless. The immense power directly broke the rock layer, causing the underground space to collapse by more than 100 meters. That accident had destroyed most of the array formations in the ruin. The remaining traps had also exhausted their spirit stones reserves over a long period of time and finally lost their effect. The person walking in front of him did not seem to know anything. These traps had lost their effect only because they were out of energy. As long as they were completely removed and given new spirit stones, they could still be used. Jiang Li controlled his clone to dismantle a few sets in a row, then stopped and continued walking inside. After descending another 100 meters underground, Jiang Li frowned. This was because he could smell the stench of blood through the nose of the sword cultivator clone. When he contacted the mural in front, some unpleasant images flashed past Jiang Li's mind. He slowed down and walked forward for a while. He saw that at the corner ahead, there was finally a very subtle fire. He decisively extinguished the flames on burning rainbow. The clone stepped on the flying sword and silently floated towards the direction of the light. At the end of this path was a stone room illuminated by flickering flames. The larger the space, the easier it was to collapse underground. However, the pathways ahead were broken in several places, but they were almost intact here. He finally saw that rogue cultivator Wuxia again. However, at this moment, the other party's image was almost not that of a human. Wuxi's upper body was bare. As he danced stiffly, he took out a full hand of blood from a clay jar and smeared it on his body. At his feet, more than 10 human limbs were scattered, forming a strange pattern with the curved intestines. Was this guy crazy? The clone's hand was already on the burning rainbow sword, ready to kill that lunatic at any moment. However, under the flickering flames, a huge shadow was reflected on the stone wall. Jiang Li hesitated for a moment, but did not immediately attack. Before the clone arrived, Wuxia had clearly been doing it for a while. After stopping the strange dance, he looked a little absent-minded. He took out a head from a cloth bag and placed it on the stone platform in front of him. It seemed that he was going to carry out the next step of the ceremony. Under the illumination of the flames, Jiang Li could clearly see the head. However, even with his mental fortitude, his sanity could not help but plummet. That head was not a human head. To be precise, the head was made of 8 completely different people, including men, women, elderly, children, and so on. They were all sewn together. At a glance, it was really disgusting. Wuxia, who was covered in blood, knelt before the head and kowtowed nonstop while muttering something. Usra, 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 O great God, the last God in the world, please wake up. I'm your most loyal follower. Answer me, respond to me, great God of Usra. Wuxia's head knocked on the ground while his voice grew louder and louder, causing Jiang Li, who was hiding in the passageway, to be able to hear him clearly. Was he worshipping a god? There were still gods in this era. Far away in the Shu Mountain 5 Elements Peak, Jiang Li could not help but lick his lips. What in the world had he encountered? Would there be any response? Would there really be a response from a god, or was it something else? The sword cultivator clone pressed down on the burning rainbow sword. A vast amount of spiritual qi was flowing out rapidly, ready to unleash a fatal blow at any moment. But wait, he still wanted to wait for the test. What could such a prayer awaken? Soon, as if attracted by something, the blood flowing on the ground flowed in the opposite direction. Then the head on the stone platform actually moved. Chapter 186, Blood of Chaos. Jiang Li recalled that Wuxia had specially gone into a village before entering the ruins. Presumably, the remains of the human body and the severed head on the ground had come from there. It was not without reason that rogue cultivators were hated by others. Of course, there were heroes among them, and even chivalrous sword cultivators. However, most rogue cultivators were villains who could not even defend their most basic morals. Wuxia was once an ordinary rogue cultivator. However, he was very lucky. After obtaining the inheritance in a declining Taoist temple on the east side of the village, he stepped onto the path of cultivation. Although the life of a rogue cultivator was difficult, and he did not have any seniors to guide him, he could barely enter the qi refinement realm by himself, and slowly came into contact with a corner of the cultivation world. Once, in order to chase after a spiritual rat, he accidentally entered the crack and discovered the ruin. The immense excitement was definitely not something that ordinary people could experience. For example, the story of a poor kid obtaining the legacy of a ruin and becoming a peerless genius, trampling countless people under his feet, marrying all the female cultivators on the goddess-ranking board, and finally ascending to an immortal and becoming a god, was very popular among the rogue cultivators. When he first entered this ruin, there were actually many collapsed burying points in the underground passageway and many skeletons that had died long ago. He followed the plot in the stories and kowtowed respectfully to bury the skeletons one by one, obtaining their inheritance. However, because it had been too long ago, and the original body of this ruin had been suddenly destroyed in the war, no one had taken proper protective measures. Therefore, some of the artifacts and pills left beside the corpse had lost all their spiritual qi under the cleansing of time, and were slowly rotting in this lonely space. As a result, he did not find much useful information on these corpses. Only on a corpse with clothes that were still intact, a particularly tall body, and a skeleton that was slightly different from humans did he find the black sword and bracelet. Other than that, there was nothing else. However, this did not dampen his enthusiasm for exploring. Using primitive methods, he dug up collapsed areas bit by bit and cleaned up the soil and rocks. He almost treated this ruin as his home. It took him a few months to barely connect the intact portion of the passageway. During this period, he also saw the chaotic murals. Unlike Jiang Li, Wuxia was only an ordinary qi refinement realm cultivator. When he saw the murals for the first time, he did not have the ability to resist at all and directly fainted. In his coma, he who was not conscious had many dreams. Bloody nightmares tortured him repeatedly. When he woke up again, there were some fragmented memories in his mind. His personality and thoughts had subtly changed. But this was not the end. This was the beginning. Ever since the day he fainted, Wuxia had experienced the same dream every day. As the number of nightmares increased, the additional memories in his mind gradually became complete. His personality also became more and more cruel. From some point in time when he looked at the murals again, he no longer felt dizzy. Instead, he felt happy and excited. He often stood in front of the murals for an entire day. Wuxia finally understood a little about this ruin. This place used to belong to a powerful sect. The Black Lotus Divine Sect was its name. The ultimate goal of this sect seemed to be to resurrect a god. Revive a god? How could there be an immortal or god in this world? This was his first thought. When the current cultivation tide had just revived, countless mortal cultivators had used their lives to search for traces of immortals and Buddhas. However, in the end, in the cultivation world, immortals and Buddhas were confirmed to not exist in this world. In mortal countries, immortals were synonymous with cultivators. As the cultivation of the earliest batch of cultivation pioneers increased, they were getting closer and closer to becoming true immortals. This answer had basically become common knowledge in the cultivation world. There were no immortals or Buddhas in this world. This group of cultivators would be the new generation of immortals and Buddhas. It was also because of this that Wuxia scoffed at this and did not believe it at all. It was not until he walked to the end of the passageway and saw the figure sitting on the huge black lotus that he understood the true value of this ruin. That dream might not have lied to him. A god, or rather the corpse of a god, was right in front of him. Yes, with the shallow knowledge of rogue cultivator Wuxia, if a corpse was more powerful than all the cultivators he had seen, then it would naturally be a god. For the first time, he tried to sacrifice a bowl of his blood according to the method in the dream. However, what excited him was that this huge divine corpse actually gave him a reaction. That day, his cultivation, which had stagnated for a long time because of lack of resources, broke through so easily. He also knew that this divine corpse was called Usura, the god of Usura. After tasting the sweetness, he could no longer extricate himself from this ruin. After repeated sacrifices and feedback, a large number of mortals died, causing the power in the ruin to successfully break through to the late-stage qi refinement realm before the age of 20. This was a speed that most rogue cultivators did not dare to imagine. Even sect disciples could be considered elites with this speed. As time passed, Wuxia's hand was dyed with more and more blood. The dream that appeared every night was no longer difficult to accept in his heart. However, in his dream one night, the divine corpse on the Black Lotus took the initiative to call him. As long as he completed another blood sacrifice, the Usura god would give him the strength to reach the Foundation establishment realm. However, the goal of the blood sacrifice was to let him slaughter the villages he came from and sacrifice his own blood relatives and clansmen. This time, the almost addicted rogue cultivator, Wuxia, hesitated. The last bit of rationality and emotions in his mind told him that this was not right. He temporarily sealed that crack. It was also at that time that he heard the news of the Great Mountain Cultivator competition. Wuxia participated in the competition and handed his choice to fate. If he could succeed in the competition and obtain what he wanted, Wuxia might decide to give up on the ruin. However, the final outcome was obvious. He did not obtain any benefits in the competition and instead lost the black sword. As someone who yearned for power, he had completely lost his mind due to negative emotions. The empathy and guilt that a person should have had completely disappeared. After returning, Wuxia did not hesitate to slaughter the entire village and dance on their corpses. He used the pieces of his parents' blood relatives to stitch up a head. Yes, the village that Wuxia had massacred was the place where he had been born and raised. As for the Usra god, it did not disappoint him either. The strange head that was stitched together twisted twice. It actually opened its eyes and spoke. "Ha ha 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 ha, lucky young man. The Usra god heard your voice. I'm very satisfied with your sacrifice. A devout person should be rewarded. Come, drink my blood and accept the gift of the Usra god." The mouth of the head opened and closed, but the tone of its voice kept changing. It was as if many people were squeezed into the head and fighting to speak with the leaking mouth. When Wuxia heard this, his crazy face immediately revealed joy. He hurriedly picked up a porcelain bowl and approached. The severed head flew into the air, and 2 streams of blood tears flowed from its eyes and dripped onto the porcelain bowl. It looked like only a few drops of blood, but Wuxia could sense the temptation of the sweet smell. As long as he drank it, he could obtain the power of the Usra god and trample all those fellows under his feet. Wuxia's smile was filled with madness. He trembled as he held the porcelain bowl and raised his head to swallow it. However, at this moment, a sword light instantly arrived. Against the Shu Mountain sword control technique that disregarded expenditure and had been prepared for a long time, which Qi Refinement Realm Cultivator could react in time. A head that was laughing sinisterly was directly chopped off by this sword, and it rolled in the air for a long time. As for the bowl-sized wound, it was burned black. Even blood could not flow out. The headless body twitched twice before collapsing. However, the porcelain bowl was firmly caught by another hand. "If no one wants this, let me study it for a few days. Goodbye." Jiang Li controlled his clone to catch the porcelain bowl, and then he did not stop for a moment before immediately turning around and charging towards the passageway outside the stone room. He was very fast and had long been prepared. He snatched the things and left. However, at this moment, his peripheral vision accidentally swept across a huge figure in the center of the stone room. Purple, 3 heads, 6 arms, however. As soon as this happened, the clone felt a strong dizziness in his head, and his feet could not help but stop. Jiang Li, who was constantly watching, decisively took over the control and continued to charge out. However, it was still too late. "Sword Cultivator, you're spoiling our plans, don't think of leaving." The head suddenly bounced up and quickly jumped to the path that the clone had to pass through. Then, it decisively exploded. Boom! Filthy blood, shattered bones, and brain matter directly covered the clone's face. His figure was inevitably pushed back by the shock wave. Jiang Li activated his protective artifact in time. The spiritual qi light instantly protected his body and the porcelain bowl in his hand, so he was not directly injured by this strike. However, as soon as he landed, his expression changed drastically. The layer of spiritual qi light membrane on his body was affected by something and suddenly fluctuated violently. In just a moment, he was already unable to control it completely. The light membrane directly exploded into a ball of spiritual qi and disappeared. Jiang Li tried to restart it twice, but the defensive artifact actually failed for no reason. "There's something wrong with this blood." Jiang Li's expression was solemn as he looked at the exploding blood mist in front of him. The burning rainbow sword had already flown back to his side, but the exit ahead was still blocked by the blood fog. Jiang Li lowered his eyes and tried his best to avoid seeing the thing in the center of the stone room. He poured the blood in the bowl into the porcelain bottle and put it away. Then he pinched his sword fingers. A drunken song filled with determination. The flames of war illuminated the world. Without waiting for the blood mist to dissipate, he struck out with the World Horizon Fire Beacon sword technique. The space in this stone room was too small, and it was utterly impossible to execute a sword technique with high might and a large area. Therefore, he still chose the sword move that came with the liquor fire sword song. Flames and sword lights flew out successively, and they quickly dispersed the bloody mist. Jiang Li controlled his clone to follow closely behind and intended to charge out of the stone room. However, something did not want him to leave. Two hands suddenly grabbed the clone's left foot from the ground, causing him to pause again. It was a headless corpse that suddenly moved, and it held on tightly without letting go. Then the head that was sent flying by his sword also flew over. It quickly flew from behind to the side of the sword cultivator clone, and there was another violent explosion. Similarly, the power of this explosion was far inferior to before. The clone staggered 2 steps forward and stopped. However, his expression was not good at all. That was because the liquor fire spiritual chi in the clone's body was no longer under his control. In the next moment, his stomach swelled up as if he had been pregnant for 10 months. Liquor fire spiritual chi surged out of his chi si uncontrollably and was about to burst his body. Jiang Li cursed internally. What strange method was this? Wasn't it too sinister? Fortunately, he let his clone test it out first. If his main body came without him knowing, with his terrifying spiritual chi storage, he might suffer a huge loss. Seeing that his body was about to burst, Jiang Li immediately made a decision. His middle finger turned into a sword finger and directly stabbed into the navel of the clone. Pew! It was as if he had suddenly turned off a pressure cooker that had been compressed to the limit. A large amount of spiritual chi poured out of his abdomen. The spiritual chi that carried the rich fragrance of alcohol spewed out as if it was free. He also wanted to use spell techniques to forcefully consume it, but the current liquor fire spiritual chi was impossible to control. It was impossible to move it into his mouth and spit it out. He could only use this method to urgently expel the spiritual chi. The main body also hurriedly stopped the spirit surge technique, barely avoiding the outcome of the clone exploding. After spitting out more than 2 minutes of spiritual chi, the stomach of the sword cultivator clone slowly calmed down. However, the danger was not resolved because of this. At this moment, there was no spiritual chi in his body. Endless weakness surged out from every inch of his body. After expelling all the spiritual chi, this situation was almost equivalent to temporary paralysis for a cultivator. The clone held his injured navel and could not even stand steadily. He tried to activate the spirit surge technique, but perhaps because the blood was still stuck to his body, the new spiritual chi was still difficult to control. Jiang Li tried to summon the flying sword again, but unfortunately, the burning rainbow sword had just been splattered with blood. All of its spiritual chi lost control and fled in a short period of time, helplessly landing beside the clone. The situation was almost hopeless. Sword Cultivator, Shu Mountain Sword Cultivator, it's you again. The blood fog slowly dissipated, and the 8 ghosts transformed into 8 black fog shadows. Shu Mountain Sword Cultivators destroyed my sect. I'll eat you, I'll eat you. From time to time, a human face would appear in the 8 black fog and fly around the clone. An evil ghost suddenly charged out, and the ghost face directly pounced onto Jiang Li's shoulder before tearing off a piece of flesh. The clone felt pain, and his body was weak because of the lack of spiritual chi. He almost lost his footing. The smell of blood, I like the smell of blood, if only there's more fear in it. Ah, delicious. Stimulated by the blood of the living, the 8 ghosts became even more excited. 2 more fell onto the back of the clone and ruthlessly tore off 2 pieces of flesh. If this continued, Jiang Li's sword cultivator clone would probably be eaten by these 8 ghosts here. I thought that something was playing tricks here. Revive the Asura god. It turns out that it's only a few ghosts. Jiang Li gritted his teeth and endured the pain before pretending to be disdainful. He could tell that in this ruin, there was no Asura god that could respond to its believers. There were only 8 evil ghosts stirring up trouble. The thing sitting in the middle of the stone room should be the source of the chaotic power in the ruin, but it was indeed completely dead. These 8 evil spirits should have been transformed from the cultivators of this place. "Shu mountain trash, what did you say? I'm going to tear you to pieces." A ball of black fog suddenly flew in front of Jiang Li. A dirty old face with a bald and long beard directly collided with the clone's face, and it seemed like it was about to bite off one of his eyeballs. "Do you dare?" Jiang Li's shout actually stunned these evil spirits. "You can't leave this stone room, right?" He looked at the 8 skeletons in the corner of the stone room. As his personality changed, Wuxia was clearly no longer in the mood to bury the corpses. Those corpses should be the original bodies of these 8 fellows. From the situation where they had no choice but to stop the clone's footsteps, it was likely that once the clone left the stone room, they would be unable to pursue him anymore. Sure enough, when they heard this, the 8 ghosts inexplicably fell silent. "The only people who know about this place are him and me. Now that he's dead, do you dare to kill me? When the next unlucky guy discovers this place, it might take 100 years, 200 years, or never." He pointed at the headless corpse on the ground again, then sat down on the ground as if he had nothing to lose. The 8 black fog no longer bit the clone. They floated around the clone, and the ghost bodies began to roll violently. A moment later, another ghost floated over. "It's fine. As long as we occupy your body, we can go out." The black fog continued to roil. This guy clearly did not know that in the eyes of people who knew how to act, it was actually very easy to distinguish whether a ghost was lying or not. If possession was that simple, you would have been able to leave long ago. "If I'm not wrong, the person who drinks this thing should be able to bring you out." Jiang Li took out the small porcelain bottle and shook it in his hand. "Then as you wish." Just as the 8 ghosts fell silent and were considering how to lure Jiang Li into submission, unexpectedly, Jiang Li actually opened the bottle stopper and poured it into his mouth without leaving a single drop. In any case, he was a clone. There was no fear. Chapter 187, Seeking Death. As soon as the few drops of blood entered his body, a strange feeling arose from the sword cultivator clone. It was a powerful and chaotic power that was completely different from spiritual qi. Although these 8 ghosts were lying in the name of gods, they were not lying. The few drops of blood that Jiang Li's clone had swallowed were indeed from the corpse. In the past, their Black Lotus divine sect had relied on the corpse of that powerful humanoid creature to rise up. Only they knew if the higher-ups of the sect really wanted to resurrect the corpse or had other intentions. However, they had studied this corpse for countless years. While their understanding of it was deeper, they had also grasped some methods to steal power from it. The murals of slaughter in the passageway, the blood that could make spiritual qi go chaotic, the weapons that could break through spiritual qi, and the few drops of blood of madness that could transform humans and inherit the power of chaos were all like this. This kind of chaotic power seemed to be an irreconcilable enemy of the spiritual qi cultivation system. Not to mention the Great Mountain region, even in the current and the 9 provinces continent, they had never heard of this kind of power. After eliminating all kinds of possibilities and guesses, they felt that this thing was probably not a creature of the 9 provinces. Asura was something that some Black Lotus divine sect cultivators knew in their dreams, after being affected by the power of the corpse. As for the meaning behind the word Asura, they were still uncertain whether it was a name, a divine status, a race, or a world. Jiang Li could sense that, after drinking the few drops of blood, the effects of the tainted blood on the surface of his body seemed to have reduced greatly. He tried to use the spirit surge technique and carefully sent a trace of spiritual qi over. As expected, the spiritual qi was no longer under his control like before. He was about to mobilize that trace of spiritual qi to remove the dirty blood on the surface of his body. However, as soon as the spiritual qi was extracted from his qi si, it encountered the chaotic power that was running amok in his body. Bang! The intense, repulsive force instantly erupted. The reaction was even more intense than when he was tainted by the blood. The trace of pure spiritual qi was quickly expelled. The reaction of the spiritual qi was also very intense, and it was directly detonated. A moment later, a small blood hole was directly blasted open on the surface of the clone's body. Jiang Li was helpless. If he had more spiritual qi, his clone would be ruined on the spot. It seemed that spiritual qi was temporarily useless. He still had to wait and see. In addition, it turned out that before eating this blood, he had to clear the spiritual qi in his body. Otherwise, he would be courting death. Wuxia must have applied blood on his body to achieve this effect. If his clone had not been stopped at that time, Jiang Li would probably have found it difficult to find the true use of these few drops of blood. I've already consumed the blood, but I only have one body. Who wants to come in? If you don't decide, I'm leaving. More and more chaotic power surged out from his body. The clone's body was undergoing a huge change. Several huge bumps appeared all over his body and were quickly swimming under his skin. All the bones, muscles, and internal organs in his body were restructuring. This process brought him pain that had reached the limits of his mind. His body could not help but twitch. However, Jiang Li's expression remained unchanged. When he spoke to the 8 evil spirits, he did not seem like a victim whose soul was about to be eaten. It looked like he was offering alms from above. That was because Jiang Li and the parallel mind were splitting the work. The first parallel mind would endure the pain while he controlled the body. Jiang Li controlled his clone to clench his fist. His tightened fist told him that his weak body was being filled by another force. The chaotic power was constantly expanding. Although it was still unfamiliar, it was better than nothing. At this rate, it would not be long before he could use this power to directly kill these 8 ghosts. However, these 8 guys had a conflict. This person is mine. When I get out, I'll definitely find sacrifices to save you. One of the ghosts excitedly wanted to rush into the clone's body, but it was blocked by the other black fog. Wait, I can't give you this person. What do you want to do? Move aside, I'm a sacrificer. All of you have to listen to me. Sacrificer. The divine sect has already been destroyed. We're already dead. You're still using your status as a sacrificer to suppress us. We agreed to let you possess that guy, but he's already dead. You can't blame anyone else for your bad luck. The 8 ghosts started to argue with each other. They spoke one after another, and no one was willing to give in. These 8 ghosts had existed for a long time. Through the power of stealing the corpses, the aura on their bodies was quite good. Moreover, they were all past cultivators and had a certain amount of spell techniques. It was hard to say how much their exact strength was, but they were probably slightly stronger than Qin Human and were probably comparable to Foundation establishment cultivators. The strongest of them was the bald, long-bearded ghost that called itself a sacrificer. Previously, it had forcefully seized the opportunity to possess Wuxia, but that had already caused a lot of dissatisfaction. Now that Wuxia was dead, it was equivalent to losing its chance. It wanted to seize Jiang Li's clone for itself, but how could the other ghosts be willing? The 8 balls of black fog became more and more violent. On this side, Jiang Li had already stood up with the flying sword in hand. He tore off a clean piece of cloth from his body and wiped the dirty blood on the sword. The weakened aura on the clone was quickly recovering. As long as he returned to his original level, he was certain that he could deal with them. Since you've decided not to come down, why don't you ask the person involved for his opinion? However, not only did Jiang Li not secretly accumulate strength, he even reminded them not to be busy with internal strife. He was still a living person here after all. The 8 ghosts that were biting each other finally recovered from the threat. They stopped biting their own kind and stared at the sword cultivator clone. Jiang Li was utterly unfamiliar with the still surging force, so it could not be said to be hidden. They could clearly sense that if this continued, then the identity of the hunter and prey might change. No matter how bad their relationship was, it was impossible for them to be willing to let the prey escape. If they let the sword cultivator recover his strength and get away, they would be really unlucky if he brought the sword cultivators of the Shu Mountain. The Black Lotus divine sect at its peak could even be destroyed by the righteous path led by Shu Mountain. How could the few ghosts that remained survive? Shu Mountain's sword cultivators might be able to withstand it. Then let's go together and rely on our own abilities. With Jiang Li's reminder, they quickly came to a consensus. They would eat Jiang Li's soul first and see if they could stuff all 8 ghosts into one person. As he spoke, the 8 balls of black fog wrapped around each other and rushed into the body of the sword cultivator clone. Then, they sharpened their heads and crazily entered the consciousness of the clone. The consciousness space of the Shu Mountain sword cultivator was the purest. At a glance, it was almost pure white. Only in the middle was a flying sword wrapped in red flames. On the sword hilt was a small wine pot. 8 evil spirits appeared imposingly with a black fog. As the black fog churned, a ferocious might surged. Although they were a little wary when they saw the flying sword in the mental space, without the support of spiritual qi, even pure mental resistance would be at a severe disadvantage. Furthermore, they were 8 against 1. Fighting in the spiritual space was their specialty as ghosts. Therefore, they did not worry about failure from the beginning to the end. Don't go overboard. If you destroy the sea of consciousness, it will all be for nothing. These 8 ghosts were originally formed from the souls of the cultivators of the Black Lotus divine sect. They might be stronger than ordinary ghosts, but they were still limited. It was all thanks to that corpse that they were able to survive a long period of time without the nourishment of yin qi. However, if one relied on too many things, they would definitely be restricted. As a result, in the end, they were unable to leave the range of the corpse's chaotic power, and they could not even leave this stone room. It was also because of this that even if they wanted to possess someone and leave, they had to have bodies with the power of chaos to provide strength to maintain their souls. This was why they did not possess Wuxia immediately. Instead, they used the power they drew out to continuously strengthen the other party's body and planned to transform it at the end. As for the blood sacrifice rituals, they were used to accelerate the drawing of the corpse's power. Now that Wuxia was dead, all their hopes had fallen on Jiang Li. 8 balls of black fog scattered in the mental world to search for the sword cultivator's consciousness. They spread out thick black fog and began to corrode this place. If his clone was not a fool, he would definitely be forced to fight. However, at such a critical moment, the corners of Jiang Li's mouth curled up. A ball of cold flames that was suffused with a dark green color suddenly descended from the sky. The black flames collided with the spreading black fog. The black fog was like cotton candy that had met water. Under the cold flames, a large area was suddenly burned away. The ghost lantern cold flame stopped after flying a certain distance and returned the same way. It calmly flew back to Jiang Li's back and slowly rotated. Jiang Li, who had been waiting impatiently in his mental world, stretched out his hand and pointed down. The 9 floating balls of ghost lantern cold flames on his back shot towards the black fog below like cannonballs, and the few evil spirits hidden in the black fog. 9 large holes were instantly burned in the vast ghost chi black fog. 3 cold flames collided with 3 of the ghosts, instantly igniting them. Jiang Li had never tested how powerful the ghost lantern cold flame was against ghosts. However, once a soul was touched by this flame, there was a high chance that it would not end well. The 3 evil spirits wailed in the air as they transformed into a ball of fire. It did not take long before they were completely incinerated by the ghost lantern cold flames. After all the energy was absorbed by the 3 balls of ghost flames, they automatically flew back to Jiang Li's back and continued to spin slowly. You dare to cause trouble in my mental world. Aren't you tired of living? Jiang Li's main body pursed his lips. A few mere ghosts dared to possess his clone. Another huge sword light flew out from below and easily split the black fog apart. Coincidentally, an unlucky ghost turned to ash under the sword heart slash wherever the sword light passed. The remaining 4 ghosts were immediately dumbfounded. What What was going on? They had been so confident just now, but in the blink of an eye, half the ghosts were exterminated. There was no time to care about the situation. They had to run. In the sky, there was Jiang Li who carried the ghost lantern Cold Flame, and in the ground, there was the parallel mind carrying the sword Heart Light Sword on his back. The four ghosts could only hurriedly rush towards the border of the Sea of Consciousness when they invaded. However, when they turned around to escape, a huge tree had already blocked their path. The 9 Nether clone also suppressed ghosts and spirits to the point of having no rivals. Countless roots stretched out like agile snakes and bound the remaining 4 ghosts. The possession operation that had been determined to succeed suddenly reversed. The 8 ghosts did not even have the chance to resist before they died. Not long ago, the sword heart slash of the sword cultivator clone was Jiang Li's trump card in the spiritual aspect. However, in mental battles, the sword cultivator clone was already the weakest now. He let the 9 Nether clone take the remaining 4 ghosts away and tried to search their memories. The sword cultivator clone slowly opened his eyes. In this stone room, only he was left, as well as the huge figure that was still sitting in the middle of the stone room. The clone tried to look up. As expected, he, who was being modified by the special blood, no longer felt dizzy. It was the first time Jiang Li had seen the corpse called the Usura God. This corpse was sitting on a skeleton throne, about 10 meters tall. Jiang Li had seen many huge beasts and should be accustomed to this. However, at this moment, his mind was shaken, and his disappointing heart started to beat rapidly. Even though he was thousands of miles away, the dragon blood in his body was still stimulated and automatically boiled. The shock did not come from his size, but an instinctive hostility and fear. This corpse seemed to be the natural enemy of humans. Just as he had seen from the corner of his eye, this corpse's skin was completely purple. If one observed carefully, they would discover that there were some strange patterns spreading on the surface of the purple skin. The 3 heads were lying there as if they had fallen asleep. Their faces were ugly and fiendish, and there were black and horns on their foreheads. Even though they had been dead for countless years, one could still feel anger on their faces when they saw them. Below, on the super burly body, there were a total of 6 arms, each as thick as a pillar. That feeling of strength could be easily suppressed with one hand when the other party was alive. Usura God, or is this just a dead Usura? Although this thing was indeed stronger, Jiang Li felt that it should not be at the level of an immortal or Buddha. Thinking about it carefully, that kind of chaotic power was indeed strange and very difficult to deal with. However, most of it was only special. The power itself was not much higher than spiritual qi. On this point, the sword cultivator clone, who had consumed the few drops of blood, had a say. Jiang Li could not guess how powerful an immortal or Buddha was. However, in the current cultivation world, every increase in cultivation realm would result in a huge increase in the spiritual qi of cultivators. If it was the power left behind by an immortal, Buddha or God, it could not have been used so easily, right? Jiang Li controlled his clone to approach the corpse, but he had just taken a step onto the stone platform when the chaotic force that had gradually calmed down suddenly started to surge. Chapter 188, Heart-Questioning Sword Cave, Burning Rainbow Sword. The clone's body was no longer easy to control. He fell back to the ground from the stone platform, and his entire body began to deform. His figure rose, his bones deformed, and his skin turned purple. Sharp claws stretched out from his 10 fingers, and a sharp pain came from his forehead. There were actually 2 small horns growing out of his skull. It could be seen that the clone's vital structure was transforming towards the corpses on the stone platform's bone throne. Moreover, the mental world of the clone was also invaded by that force. The pure white mental world had just been attacked by 8 evil spirits. This time, it was corroded by a wave of scarlet blood. This thing was slightly similar to when Jiang Li cultivated the beast blood diagram, but the feeling it gave him was countless times more terrifying. Anger, hatred, and all sorts of chaotic emotions transformed into a bloody fog that surged out from all directions and constantly soaked into Jiang Li's parallel mind. Most importantly, this thing had nothing to do with souls. The ghost lantern, cold flame, and 9 nether wood were useless. It seemed that it was not so easy to take advantage of others. While obtaining this chaotic power, the price was to lose oneself or even become inhuman in the end. When he saw this, Jiang Li felt dense fear towards the Asura corpse. He originally wanted to circulate the Bodhisattva Heart Sutra and pull the parallel mind back to take refuge. However, on second thought, if he gave up an important part of the sword cultivator clone's life, the benefits of the Bodhisattva Heart Sutra would probably be greatly reduced when he retracted his parallel mind. After weighing the pros and cons, Jiang Li still did not choose to interfere. He allowed the clone's body and soul to become unrecognizable under the modification of the blood of madness. Under the power of chaos, the only thing that was still resisting was the light sword that represented the talent of Sword Heart. The Sword of Light was not easily tainted by the blood color, but its strength was insufficient. It did not have the ability to resist the blood color climbing onto the sword. It could only try its best to release light in an attempt to slow down the process. With this excessive release of power, coupled with chaotic contamination, the Sword Heart Light Sword finally could not endure the burden. A crack suddenly appeared on it, and the gaps began to quickly spread. When the crack spread throughout the entire body and the light sword shattered, it would mean that the Sword Heart talent of the Sword Cultivator clone had been destroyed. To a Shu Mountain Sword Cultivator, this was even harder to accept than death. The huge Asura corpse seemed to have sensed that something was resisting its power. A force suddenly flowed out of its body and slowly surged into the Sword Cultivator clone, accelerating this change even more. However, as the change intensified, a hidden problem was exposed. That was, the essence of the Sword Cultivator clone was actually a corpse too. He completely relied on the profundity of the Bodhisattva Heart Sutra to appear no different from a living person. However, the essence of this clone's body did not change at all. If it was the goddess of mercy herself, it might be easy to resurrect the dead, but to a weak newbie like Jiang Li, it was still far from enough. This was also the reason why the Sword Cultivator clone had always received Jiang Li's spirit surging technique, but his cultivation had not improved much. It could live a relatively normal life and be almost the same as a full resurrection, but once it exceeded a certain limit, the outcome would be hard to say. Now, the intense modification of the blood of madness seemed to want to directly change the race of the clone. Clearly, it had already severely exceeded this limit. Cardiac arrest, dilated pupils, and organ failure. The Sword Cultivator clone's body suddenly showed signs of death, and its vitality suddenly slowed down until it stopped. The false resurrection created by the Bodhisattva Heart Sutra was suddenly halted without any warning. In other words, the unlucky Sword Cultivator clone died again. This forced the blood of madness that was modifying the clone's body to stop. This power could not transform a dead person into an Asura. Halfway through the transformation, it suddenly realized that the body was a dead person. What should it do now? The blood of madness, which did not have any intelligence, ran around in the clone's body. However, the power of chaos could not do anything in this situation, and it was completely useless. The lifeless body no longer changed. In the end, the terrifying blood of madness gathered in the heart in his chest and quietly lay dormant. The stone chamber fell silent again. There was only a beating heart left that made a faint sound every few minutes. There, on the Shu Mountain 5 Elements Peak, Jiang Li politely declined the invitation of the few sword cultivators to spar. After all, he was the publicly acknowledged #1 Qi refinement cultivator in the cultivation world of the Great Mountain region. To the proud Shu Mountain disciples, it would be a sin to not challenge such a person to spar with him. Even though Jiang Li had already defeated more than 20 experts these past 2 days, it was still hard to change their enthusiasm. However, he did not have the time today. The Mystic Realm trial had yet to begin. Through Elder Mu, Jiang Li obtained a chance to enter a cultivation holy land of the Shu Mountain 5 Elements Peak. That place was called the Heart-Questioning Sword Cave. This was the gap between Shu Mountain and the other sects. Just their mountain alone had several functional mystic realms. The treatment that the Shu Mountain disciples could receive was simply enviable. Senior Brother Chang, are you going into the Heart-Questioning Sword Cave? Xianxia was currently undergoing Elder Mu's special training and could not be selected for the time being. Jiang Li went to find the Golden Light Sword, Chang Wanju, to help him lead the way. The two of them arrived before the Heart-Questioning Sword Cave together, but the disciple guarding the cave ignored Jiang Li, who was from another sect, and only thought that Chang Wanju wanted to enter to cultivate. This was because this sword cave was specially used by the Shu Mountain disciples to sharpen their sword heart and cultivate their minds. Under normal circumstances, only disciples who had awakened their sword heart cultivation were qualified to use it. Although Jiang Li was powerful, he clearly did not have a sword heart. It was useless to be in the Heart-Questioning Sword Cave. No, I accompanied junior brother Jiang Li here this time. This is Elder Mu's token. You can test it. Chang Wanju did not explain further. He only handed a token to the disciple guarding the cave. Actually today, he wanted to see if Jiang Li had any talent in the sword heart. At that time, when Jiang Li revealed the sharp sword aura field on the arena, Chang Wanju had just been beaten unconscious by Jiang Li, so he naturally did not see that scene. Later on, when Peak Master Wei Wangxuan told him about this, he was shocked for a long time. After all, Jiang Li had tested it with a rusty sword in front of him. Now, he was suddenly told that Jiang Li actually had the sword heart and had just awakened it. Wouldn't the blame of negligence, causing the sect to lose a super genius, fall on him? Although the sect did not blame him, he still could not help but blame himself. A moment later, the disciple guarding the cave confirmed it. Senior Brother Chang, Junior Brother Jiang, please come in. All right, a genius of Chang Wanju's level did not need the approval of an elder to enter the Heart-Questioning Sword Cave. He walked into the Heart-Questioning Sword Cave. It was a very beautiful natural cave. However, unlike ordinary caves, the stalactites hanging on the ceiling and the stalagmites erected on the ground were all sharp swords. If a strand of hair was pulled out and blown on it, it would be split into two without any delay. He even went up to carefully observe them. On each stone sword, there were stronger or weaker sword chi attached. Jiang Li marveled at this, and Chang Wanju had a proud expression as he explained the origins and past of this sword cave to Jiang Li. According to him, this heart-questioning sword cave was once the place where the ancestors of Shu Mountain entered seclusion to comprehend the sword. It was also the place where the fallen sword cultivators buried their swords. Over the years, generations of people took over. Their comprehension and persistence towards the sword were carved inch by inch in this cave. Cultivating sword techniques here was really suitable. There were even smart disciples who had comprehended powerful sword techniques and sharp sword intent here. It could be said to be a rare treasure ground. Jiang Li came here because he wanted to make up for his shortcomings before he reached the Foundation establishment realm. Cultivating the mind was not much different from spirit refinement. This place might be able to help him. When he reached the depths of the sword cave, the stalactite swords here were even more terrifying than the ones outside. With the naked eye, one could see the dense cold light flickering on the blade. If he dug them out and used them, their might would probably not be inferior to a yellow rank artifact. Further ahead, thousands of flying swords of various colors stabbed into the ground, looking very magnificent. This was the sword burial ground for the fallen sword cultivators of Shu Mountain. None of the Shu Mountain flying swords were lower than the profound rank. If others saw this scene, they would feel hardtake on the spot. However, the truth was that the Shu Mountain sword cultivated the life-bound flying sword. When the flying sword was damaged, sword cultivators would be injured at the same time. When sword cultivators died, the flying sword would naturally be damaged as well. This kind of damage affected the foundation and could not be salvaged. Shu Mountain did not lack those materials, so there was naturally no need to reforge them. They let these relics of their ancestors sleep here. The will they left on the flying sword might also be able to bless their descendants and protect Shu Mountain. Junior brother Jiang, cultivate here. This stone is the center of the entire sword cave. The effects are the best. Chang Wanju found a place for Jiang Li. It could be seen that there were traces of deliberate polishing on the black rock, and it was smooth and flat. After thanking him, he sat cross-legged and calmed his mind. At this moment, a breeze blew through the cave. The swaying sword let out a soft hum, causing his consciousness to quickly empty and enter his mental world. In Jiang Li's consciousness, besides himself, there was also the first parallel mind with purple demonic light in his eyes, sitting on the ground with a bitter smile. His entire body was already soaked in blood. The expression on the first parallel mind's face alternated between anger and hatred. He looked crazy and chaotic. Clearly, this was not normal. However, every time the parallel mind was about to go crazy, he would be forcefully pulled back to his senses by Jiang Li. On his back, the sword Heart Light sword had not completely shattered, but it was already not far away. The light sword was covered in large and small cracks. A large amount of blood-colored matter was filled in the cracks, preventing it from recovering. It was always in a terrible state of near collapse. Strictly speaking, the body of the sword cultivator clone was indeed not completely dead. However, according to the standards of the Bodhisattva Heart Sutra, it was dead. Therefore, the first parallel mind left his body and returned to Jiang Li's consciousness. What Jiang Li needed to do now was to accept everything from the sword cultivator clone, to push the level of the Bodhisattva Heart Sutra, and increase his cultivation in spirit refinement. As for the sword cultivator clone's body, he had already gotten the 9 nether clone to retrieve it. He felt that the body could still be salvaged. Jiang Li's consciousness stepped forward and pressed a hand on the forehead of the parallel mind. In the next moment, a large amount of memories surged over. In front of Jiang Li, a magnificent picture of life unfolded. Before his first death, Tang Yan had not experienced much. His life could be described as smooth sailing. He was born in a wealthy family and knew etiquette, music, and poetry since he was young. He had never starved, did hard labor, or fought in groups or visited brothels. He spent his mortal childhood as a refined and outstanding young master. Subsequently, in the Immortal Ascension Pavilion's Immortal Opportunity Test, he was tested to have a top-grade spiritual root. In the Immortal Ascension Assembly, he entered the Shu Mountain 5 Elements Peak with an unparalleled status. As a genius potential cultivator, he welcomed the opportunities and turning points of his life. After that, he entered Shu Mountain and cultivated freely under the tutelage of the Liquor Sword Elder. In the sect, there were cheers and laughter, diligent and tireless training throughout the night, and also a drunken dream. With the impressive talent of a top-grade spiritual root, he successfully entered the Foundation establishment realm in just 5 years. What followed was friendship and love. When they cultivated the 5-element sword formation together, the purest and most beautiful experiences of their youth came one after another. Junior sister Shuang Meng's voice, smile, and cold hair made him entranced. It was the beauty and gentleness of life. The last thing he remembered was the sharp teeth of the golden core zombie demon stabbing into his neck, as well as junior sister Shuang Meng's eyes that were filled with tears. The unwillingness and fear before death, as well as the fact that he really did not want to die. These were the warm memories of his life. Then he revived. After being taken over by the parallel mind, the world seemed to have become much wider. After being pursued by the golden-winged condor, he awakened his sword heart talent and destroyed the scaled demon tribe. He discovered the 9 nether branch and reunited with his friends and loved ones. This was a new life and also growth. After reclaiming his past, he gave it his all in the competition and welcomed his peak again. However, his life was like a rainbow that lit up the night sky. It ended with just a flash. In the stone room of the ruin, he consumed the blood of madness and died again because he could not withstand the transformation. Compared to insects, the life of the sword cultivator, Tang Yan, was longer and more exciting. All kinds of complicated and varied sensory emotions were even more profound and deep. After comprehending everything in this life, Jiang Li's Bodhisattva Heart Sutra advanced at an extremely fast speed, and his mind and enlightenment improved along with it. Great Carefree Bodhisattva Heart Sutra, Level 5 Right Arrow 6 Right Arrow 7 Right Arrow 8. The corners of Jiang Li's mouth curled up, and he seemed to be very satisfied. However, Cheng Wanju, who was not far away from him, was dumbfounded. What was he laughing at? This was the first time he had seen someone sit in the heart-questioning sword cave for so long without stimulating their sword heart. Chapter 189, Five-Colored Sword Tied. Just by retrieving a parallel mind, Jiang Li's spirit refinement cultivation level advanced by leaps and bounds. The effect was far greater than the previous few times. However, this was very normal. One had to know that the first chapter of the Bodhisattva Heart Sutra was not meant to revive a human. Without using the cheat, even if he cultivated the first chapter of the Bodhisattva Heart Sutra to the 9th level, the parallel mind could only exist for a year at most. If it contained too many memories, it might even have a shorter lifespan. The original intention of this cultivation method was to let cultivators start from small insects to slowly cultivate, letting people understand the equality of all beings and the life contained in a single leaf or flower. However, Jiang Li did not act according to common sense. He had only reached the first level, but he had already set the parallel mind to an infinite amount of time, allowing him to directly place the parallel mind on humans and even cultivators, allowing him to experience the ups and downs of life. The enlightenment of life from humans naturally far exceeded that of insects. The speed at which the Bodhisattva Heart Sutra improved was not strange at all. The only troublesome thing was the blood that soaked his soul. It contained infinite anger and hatred. It made this delicacy a little hard to digest. However, the Bodhisattva Heart Sutra lived up to its name. If he could injure himself because of various emotions when retrieving the parallel mind, how could it be considered the cultivation method of a mighty figure? In front of the Bodhisattva Heart Sutra, the 7 emotions and 6 desires were nutrients that were indispensable in life. Even if the chaotic emotions were difficult to digest and might cause a stomachache, they would ultimately be transformed into Jiang Li's own strength. The first parallel mind quickly shrunk under Jiang Li's palm and finally disappeared. Everything about him had been absorbed back to his main body. Behind Jiang Li's consciousness, a resplendent sword of light gradually appeared. However, unlike the sword heart light sword of his clone, the surface of this sword was covered in red patterns that looked like porcelain cracks. Apart from having the same sharpness and defense-piercing effect of an ordinary sword heart, there was also a bone-chilling killing intent on the blood-patterned sword. On Jiang Li's interface, an innate talent skill called Usura Sword Heart appeared. At this point, Jiang Li finally truly possessed his own sword heart. Jiang Li had expected this. Even reincarnating, as a few insects could grant a talent like cocoon break. Sword heart was a talent that leaned towards the mind, so it was naturally a great match. There was no problem in getting it. However, when absorbing the parallel mind, the sword heart of the clone completely mixed with the power of chaos, forming the sword heart with the prefix of Usura. Jiang Li carefully sensed the sword of light on his back, and he was roughly able to determine that the might of the Usura sword heart was much stronger than the original sword heart. However, it also lost its purity because of this. It was hard to say if the result was good or bad. He held the blood-patterned sword in his hand, and immediately, with the glow of a blood-colored light, stimulated it, reflecting the full moon in his mental world. The sharp sword aura field that his clone had awakened by stimulating the sword heart was further augmented by the Usura sword heart. It seemed to be like a fish in water as it slowly spread out. A few steps away from where he was sitting, the area covered by the sharp sword aura field touched a flying sword. Swoosh! The flying sword was affected by the sharp sword aura field and suddenly trembled. Chang Wanju, who had been waiting for a long time, had a strange look in his eyes. It happened after all. This made sense. Junior brother Jiang Li was a genius blessed by the heavens, so what was so surprising about having a talent in the sword heart? Immediately, he shook his head helplessly. It seemed that he had really wasted a great sword cultivator. If junior brother Jiang Li entered Shu Mountain, he might appear even more talented than now. In the next moment, this light tremble broke the silence in the sword cave. The large number of damaged flying swords in the cave spread out in circles. Soon, the entire heart-questioning sword cave was filled with the sound of swords. They reflected back and forth in the cave like waves. While in the cave, Jiang Li felt that the translucent sword cry could easily pierce through his body and directly strike his soul, and it completely eliminated his complicated emotions. Originally, due to the chaotic emotions in the parallel mind, the progress of the Bodhisattva Heart Sutra began to slow down. However, this sword cry seemed to have a force that penetrated into the soul and directly shattered the obstructing rocks. It felt as if he had just lifted a huge burden off his chest. He felt comfortable from the inside out. After the stubborn, chaotic emotions were shattered by the sword cry, the Bodhisattva Heart Sutra continued to circulate at high speed, turning all the emotions into life insights. Great Carefree, Bodhisattva Heart Sutra Level 8 Right Arrow Level 9. The entire life experience of the sword cultivator clone finally allowed Jiang Li to advance his spirit refinement cultivation to the same level as the other two. With such a foundation establishment, he did not know what kind of Tao foundation he would eventually cultivate. However, in the outside world, the crisp and clear sword cry still did not stop. If it was an ordinary sword cultivator, it was impossible for their sword heart to be stimulated for a long time. Basically, they would retract their sword heart after triggering the sword cry wave. It was not until the sword cry was over that it would be activated again. However, Jiang Li was different. The sharp sword aura field formed by stimulating his sword heart enveloped his body all year round, and he had no need to activate or deactivate it. As long as he used the Usura sword heart to assist him, he would be able to easily maintain it for a long time. Under his continuous stimulation, the sword cries of thousands of damaged flying swords rose and fell continuously. Coupled with the reflection of the cave walls, the crisp sword cries actually became more and more intense. After reaching a certain level, the countless stalagmites and stalactites in the cave were also stimulated. Strands of pure sword chi slowly seeped out and were slowly gathered by the wills of the deceased sword practitioners within the sword cries. In the end, they actually condensed together and transformed into numerous dazzling sword lights that fluttered about in the sword burial ground. At this moment, Chang Wanju, who was still blaming himself, widened his eyes. What was going on? Jiang Li's sword heart was too persistent. He had been in Shu Mountain for so many years and had never seen a disciple squander his sword heart like this. If he did not stop now, damn it, it was too late. Chang Wanju really wanted to wake Jiang Li up in advance, but if he was disturbed while cultivating, not only would his previous efforts be wasted, he might even suffer a backlash. With this hesitation, the situation went out of control. He drew his golden sword and created a sword net with a swoosh, instantly shattering the dozen or so five-colored sword lights that flew towards him. However, pew pew pew. Chang Wanju took a few steps forward, but 3 sword lights flew from behind and struck his back. Fortunately, these sword lights were only stimulated by the cave sword bamboo shoots and were not very powerful. They had not broken through the defensive membrane of his artifact. However, when he saw more and more 5-colored sword lights gathering in front of him, his expression could not help but change. This was an advanced method to use the heart-questioning sword cave. The sword lights stimulated by the cave could efficiently sharpen the sword heart. However, this method was usually used by late-stage foundation establishment cultivators and above. It was really too dangerous for Qi refinement realm cultivators. Oh no! He saw another wave of sword lights converge into a tide, and it flew towards Jiang Li, who was meditating. Tripartite golden light sword. Chang Wanju decisively utilized his trump card, and he defended Jiang Li with all three swords. The tripartite golden light sword weaved into a net, completely enveloping him and Jiang Li behind him. However, using a sword formation like this consumed a huge amount of spiritual qi. The sword lights became denser and denser. 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes. Before Jiang Li could even open his eyes, a flaw appeared in the tripartite golden light sword formation. A sword light broke through the sword light and struck Chang Wanju's right hand. In order to conserve spiritual qi to execute the tripartite sword formation, he, who had not activated his defensive artifact, felt a pain in his hand. Immediately, more sword lights flew in. Chang Wanju hurriedly utilized his defensive artifact to resist it with his body, but a few sword lights still passed him and struck Jiang Li. However, just as he thought that Jiang Li would suffer a backlash and spit out blood because of the disturbance, when the sword lights descended onto Jiang Li, it was like a breeze had brushed past, and it only caused his clothes to flutter before he did not react any further. Damn, why am I worried about this monster? Only then did Chang Wanju recall the fear of being dominated by Demon King Jiang on the stage. Even his full-strength sword heart was unable to injure Jiang Li, so how could these sword lights do anything? After another period of time, after Chang Wanju confirmed that Jiang Li was really fine, he decisively shrunk the defense line to protect himself, and then he was forced to retreat repeatedly by the sword lights. Jiang Li was at the center, where the sword lights were the most concentrated. He really could not block it. Chang Wanju could only stand in a corner and work hard to withstand the incoming five-colored sword tide. He secretly prayed that Jiang Li's sword heart would quickly be exhausted. Exhaustion, what's that? Gradually, as the resonating sword cry became more and more intense, the golden light sword Chang Wanju could not even stand on the edge of the sword burial ground. He was pushed by the seemingly endless sword light, and actually retreated all the way to the entrance of the heart-questioning sword cave. At this moment, he was covered in fine sword injuries and was in an extremely sorry state. Blood slowly flowed out from the hundreds of wounds. Although the injuries were not serious, his appearance was truly terrifying. Senior brother Chang, you're taking such a huge risk. However, to be able to withstand the five-colored sword tide for so long, you're indeed worthy of your reputation. The disciple guarding the door hurriedly handed over 2 healing pills. After Chang Wanju consumed them, the wound on his body had already stopped bleeding. It would not be long before the scab healed. However, he looked into the cave and saw that the waves of the five-colored sword light did not stop. Senior brother Chang, where's junior brother Jiang Li? The disciple guarding the door looked at the entrance in confusion. Why did Jiang Li not come out? Ignore him. Chang Wanju felt that he had been embarrassed and did not want to talk, so he replied curtly. However, in the next moment, a sword light that was over the height of a person flew out of the cave. He hurriedly dodged it, and after the sword light flew out, it directly cut a large rock in the distance into 2. The muscles on Chang Wanju's face twitched twice. Clearly, the size and power of the five-colored sword tied in the heart-questioning sword cave had increased again. Let's inform the elders. In the heart-questioning sword cave, Jiang Li was still immersed in his mental world happily. At that time, he had only tried to stimulate the Asura sword heart to play. After trying a few times, he planned to withdraw his cultivation. However, right at that moment, white light spots suddenly appeared in his consciousness for some reason, and floated towards the blood-traced light sword. The Asura sword heart did not reject it. It directly absorbed the specks of light, and it even seemed to grow a little stronger. At that moment, he became energetic. Could it be that there was a cheat in his mental world? As long as he held the light sword, he could always become stronger. How could he bear to end it so easily? As he continued to hold the light sword, the light specks that appeared in his mental world did not disappoint him. More and more of them became dense like snow and flew towards the light sword. In just a short while, he had actually raised his Usura sword heart to level 3. That was because these 5-colored sword lights contained the sword Dao aptitude of the Shu Mountain ancestors. As long as he shattered these sword lights, these wills would fuse into the sword heart and become the best nourishment for its growth. This was also the reason why the heart-questioning sword cave could become one of the Shu Mountain holy lands. At this moment, he finally felt that something was amiss. Why was his body feeling ticklish? Maintaining the stimulation status of his sword heart, he exited his mental world. When he opened his eyes, he was almost frightened to death. What entered his sight was nothing else. There were dense flying sword lights of all colors flying in front of his eyes. In the center of the sword lights, he would suffer at least 10 sword lights attacks per second. This was also the reason why he felt so ticklish. If not for the fact that the power of these sword lights was limited, he would have suspected that Shu Mountain had deliberately set a trap for him because they were unhappy with him. Jiang Li was not stupid. Through the frequency at which the sword light landed on his body and the number of light dots appearing in his mental world, he had already roughly guessed the situation. It turned out that there was such a good thing in the heart-questioning sword cave. Why did they not tell him? How stingy. In the beginning, because his body had a layer of spiritual chi barrier by the lake heart protection, the sword lights that were slightly inferior could not penetrate that layer of barrier, so he did not feel anything at all. However, as the sword lights gradually became stronger, lake heart protection had already endured too many attacks and could no longer completely defend. However, Jiang Li did not hesitate. He separated the parallel mind again and asked him to help maintain the sword heart. Jiang Li, on the other hand, stood up without the slightest fear and endured the even more violent sword light attacks. The skin on his body instantly became pitch black. At the same time, the muscle strength in his entire body carried the 9 nether spiritual chi and distributed evenly throughout his body, converting all his strength into extreme defense. This was a defensive technique that Jiang Li had not used in battle for a long time, and he had always been secretly cultivating it. It was the Overlord Body Art. Overlord Body Art Level 6. As long as it rose another 2 levels, he would be able to transform the super defense of the Overlord Body Art into the strongest defensive status. At that point, even he would not be able to hurt himself anymore. Chapter 190, Sword Spirit's Last Gift. Under the circumstances of activating the Overlord Body Art with all his might, Jiang Li's body strength mixed with spiritual chi covered the surface of his body. The defensive effect against physical and spiritual chi attacks was extremely powerful. In theory, as long as the attack landed on his body did not surpass the combined strength of Jiang Li's own strength and spiritual chi, it would be impossible to break through his Overlord Body Art. Apart from being unable to attack when defending, the only flaw of this body cultivation method was that it consumed too much strength and spiritual chi. However, to Jiang Li, the word exhaustion had not appeared in his dictionary for a long time. Countless sword lights continuously landed on his body, taking away several times the total spiritual chi reserve of an ordinary chi refinement realm cultivator. Jiang Li's stamina and spiritual chi had always been maintained at the maximum value and had never dropped at all. The sword lights that struck his body could only transform into nutrients for the sword heart and the experience of the Overlord Body Art. However, nothing was absolute in this world. Among the thousands of Shu Mountain ancestors, the weakest were at the Chi Refinement or Foundation Establishment realm, while the strongest were at the Core Formation or Nascent Soul realm. There were even stronger big shots. The will they left on the flying sword, naturally, had a huge difference. As the sword cries became more and more intense, a few relatively larger sword lights gradually gathered in the sky above the sword burial ground. These sword lights condensed from the cave's sword aura were actually quite ordinary in terms of pure energy calculation. They were only at the level of the Foundation establishment realm. However, the problem was the wills of those powerful sword cultivators. These wills could basically be considered incomplete sword hearts. The sword hearts could ignore or greatly weaken one's defense. Even the overlord body art was helplessly countered by it. A metallic sword light silently attacked from behind and directly struck Jiang Li's back. The disciple uniform made of the 9 nether wood roots was directly cut and exposed his skin, and a slight trace of blood appeared on the skin on Jiang Li's back. This strike was already more powerful than Chang Wanju's strongest strike. Jiang Li touched his back and could not help but sigh. These Shu Mountain sword cultivators who could ignore defense were all unstoppable. How terrifying! At this moment, outside the heart-questioning sword cave, a few sword lights streaked across the sky and landed at the entrance of the cave. It was a few Shu Mountain elders who had heard the news. However, they still looked a little travel-worn, as if they had just returned to the mountain after flying on their swords for a long time. One of them was the Metal Sword Peak's Peak Master, Wei Wangxuan. "Greetings, Peak Master, greetings, elders." "Master elders, you're back. Where are the 2 uncle masters?" The cave guard disciple was usually a nobody and was very nervous when facing the higher-ups of the sect. On the other hand, genius disciples like Chang Wanju, who were valued, were much more at ease and neither servile nor overbearing. However, he did not speak about Jiang Li immediately. Instead, he asked about the 2 uncle masters. The uncle masters he mentioned were naturally Zhuo Mo and Zhuo Luo, the 2 golden core cultivators. Why else would it be said that the cultivators of Shu Mountain were very close? When Elder Duan Shuang betrayed the sect back then, he was decisively labeled a traitor. Then, the Golden Core elders on the warship chased after him through the night, causing the other party to be heavily injured and shot down before he could even escape 1,000 miles away. One had to know that at that time, Duan Shuang had not even massacred the city and had already received such treatment. Looking at Shu Mountain, the 2 golden cores surnamed Zhuo had already massacred the city. The news had already spread throughout the entire cultivation world. The fact that they had fallen to become demonic cultivators was irrefutable. However, even so, Shu Mountain was still willing to risk universal condemnation and not announce to the outside world that they would expel the 2 elders from the sect. They still refused to believe this fact. After the competition ended, Peak Master Wei led the group to set off. However, his goal was not to deal with the traitors, but to find the people and clear things up. The 2 of them ran to the vicinity of Nightless City and attacked a few sect's merchant ships. We've seen the traces. It's indeed their sword technique. Peak Master Wei and the few elders had ugly expressions. They had run to the southern Seal Kingdom and practically checked every sword scar in the city, hoping to find any suspicious traces. However, the truth disappointed them. In the ruins, they found more than 2,000 huge sword scars. These sword scars came from more than 20 types of Shu Mountain sword techniques. However, no matter how picky they were, they could only tell that Elder Zhuo Mo and Elder Zhuo Luo's sword techniques were exquisite. As for the suspicious points, there was really nothing. After that, they used special methods to find all the clues and finally chased them to the Nightless City. However, they learned that 2 golden core sword cultivators had brazenly attacked the Nightless City caravan. As the peak master of the Metal Mountain Peak, Elder Wei was their boss. It would be strange if he was in a good mood. The few elders who were with him explained a little. Chang Wanju still wanted to ask more, but Elder Wei waved his hand and stopped them. He still had to report the situation to the Shu Mountain sword head later. He did not know how to speak, and now he did not want to mention this matter at all. You're saying that the scripture storage valley's Jiang Li is in this cave. Peak Master Wei and a few elders stood at the entrance of the cave. From time to time, a five-colored sword tide would fly towards them. However, before the sharp sword lights could approach them, they dissipated in the air and disappeared without a trace. Obviously, this sword heart talent was not as simple as Jiang Li had imagined. There were even more profundities waiting for him to discover in the depths of his cultivation. He has just awakened his sword heart and can already stimulate the heart-questioning sword cave to such an extent. A mere chi refinement realm cultivator can withstand the five-colored sword tide. This Jiang Li's future is limitless. It's a pity that such a good talent in the sword heart is destined to be wasted. Jiang Li was a body cultivator and was also Elder He's disciple. Wei Wangxuan was a cultivator from the same era as Elder He, and the two of them had interacted quite a bit. When he thought about how such an unpolished jade was picked up by that brute, he could not help but feel pain. This was especially true in the final round of the competition, where Jiang Li fought Monk Li Yuan. It was even more absurd. From the beginning to the end, he had suppressed the other party who had cultivated the palm meditation technique. In the end, he did not even suffer any injuries. That was simply not something an ordinary person could do. Peak Master, what should we do next? Should we get him out? If anything happens to Jiang Li here, it'll probably be difficult to explain things to the scripture storage valley. Due to the influence of Elder Zhuo Mo and Elder Zhuo Luo, there was a lot of controversy regarding the Shu Mountain 5 elements peak in the cultivation world of the Great Mountain region. If the outstanding disciples of the Scripture Storage Valley died prematurely in the territory of Shu Mountain, it would be hard to explain. It's fine, don't underestimate this Qi refinement winner. However, to be safe, I'll go in and take a look first. After all, Jiang Li was invited to Shu Mountain by him. He could not just ignore the person. Wei Wangxuan let the others disperse while he slowly walked into the cave. The sword lights that were fluttering in the cave automatically moved aside in front of him, and he entered all the way without even the corners of his clothes being injured. In the cave, Jiang Li was still happily grinding. Even though these sword lights had inherited the sharpness of the Shu Mountain sword cultivators, most of them were unable to break through Jiang Li's defense. Only a few sword lights were enough to scrape his dead skin, under the enhancement of the deceased sword cultivator's will. However, because his recovery ability was also abnormally powerful, if one did not have perfect vision, he would generally not be able to see the scars. He was taking advantage of the situation here, but he did not forget to taunt the empty cave. No way, no way, no way, this is all you can do. Do you dare to be more violent? Cultivating the overlord body art required one to be beaten up to feel the dispersion of power. The weak sword lights really made him unable to control himself. However, in the end, his mockery was heard by Peak Master Wei. This is the first time I've heard such a request in all my years of cultivation. Since you're a guest, how can I disappoint you? Peak Master Wei was not too surprised to see that Jiang Li was completely fine within the sword light. He knew Jiang Li's toughness. On the other hand, the five-colored sword tide stimulated by Jiang Li's sword heart was obviously not enough for him. Therefore, Peak Master Wei very generously decided to help this junior. Clang! His golden flying sword unsheathed itself and landed in the sword burial ground. Swoosh! As Wei Wangxuan pointed with his finger, practically the entire heart-questioning sword cave shook. Then, the sword cries and five-colored tides that resounded in the cave suddenly became different. Swoosh! A golden sword light slashed past Jiang Li's shoulder that was covered in pitch-black skin. Jiang Li felt his shoulder turn slightly cold, and a trace of blood actually flowed down from his shoulder. The ordinary sword light actually drew a long, narrow, and small wound on Jiang Li's body. Jiang Li was shocked. What was going on? Why did these sword lights suddenly become so strong without any signs? Pew pew! Two more sword lights flew over and struck Jiang Li's chest, and they directly drew a large X on his chest. Although this kind of superficial wound could heal in a few seconds, there were more and more of them coming. Sword lights flew over one after another, causing his body to be covered in injuries. However, what puzzled him was that among the 5-colored sword light, only the sword light that represented the metal attribute became especially powerful. It was as if it was directly augmented with a powerful sword heart. Even his overlord body art could not completely withstand it. After suffering a few dozen consecutive strikes, a black stream suddenly stretched out from his waist and circled around Jiang Li at extreme speed. It curled up a few times and instantly minced the dozens of golden sword lights into pieces. Swoosh, the indestructible dragon imprisoning lock moved to protect its owner. The pitch-black chain danced in the cave like a demonic dragon, directly clearing away nearly half of the sword light in the surrounding area. After that, the dragon imprisoning lock flew back to Jiang Li's side, and then it coiled once more before weaving into a black ball-shaped cage that protected Jiang Li in the center. Jiang Li had never used the dragon imprisoning lock as a defensive equipment all along, but it was not because its defense was weak, but precisely because it was too strong. According to Elder He, this dragon imprisoning lock was discovered on an ancient dragon corpse. The material was extremely special. Even a true dragon could not destroy it, much less anyone in the current cultivation world. Now, because of the passage of time, its former power was no longer present. Moreover, because the material was hard and could not be forged or carved, it could not be used to refine new artifacts. This made a divine artifact end up as a chain that only had the advantage of being hard. However, the tough material itself was already an extremely rare treasure. Dense sword lights continuously collided with the dragon imprisoning lock, causing sparks to fly everywhere. Then, not a trace was left behind on it. Even the powerful sword heart talent could not work on this chain. Jiang Li was very satisfied with this. The toughness of the dragon imprisoning lock had not changed, but its strength was too small earlier. Although external attacks could not destroy it, they could easily send it flying. Now, after a long period of spiritual qi nourishment, the dragon imprisoning lock had already become much stronger. Jiang Li did not plan to let the dragon imprisoning lock block all the sword lights. That was not in line with his interests. With a thought, he controlled the dragon imprisoning lock to adjust the gap between the ball-shaped chains. A portion of the sword light landed on his body, and he continued to cultivate the overlord body art. Elder Wei was also surprised to see this. He did not expect that Elder He would actually give the dragon imprisoning lock to this disciple. That old fellow really attached great importance to this young disciple. However, in this case, this level of sword light was meaningless to him. Wei Wangshuan raised his sword finger again, and was just about to point it out when he shook his head, and gave up on the intention of increasing the difficulty. As your elder, it's not good for others to say that I bullied you. Forget it, take this as compensation for those sword wounds. Elder Wei pointed his sword out, and the golden flying sword emitted a glow again. Swoosh! Under the guidance of the golden sword of light, all the flying swords in the sword burial ground began to respond to each other. After reaching the limit, the cave suddenly recovered its calm. On the other hand, the 5-colored sword lights formed from will, and sword cave breath seemed to have received a command, and they all flew towards Jiang Li. For a time, it was like a storm was brewing. The ball formed by the dragon imprisoning lock was compressed to the limit and directly stuck to Jiang Li's body. It was not until 2 minutes later, when all the sword lights were like moths to a flame, that the sword rain stopped. That was it. However, what surprised Jiang Li was that, after this wave of sword rain, his mental world abnormally did not receive the white light spots. He carefully opened the dragon imprisoning lock to take a look. Only then did he discover that countless white lights in front of him were slowly gathering, and they actually transformed into a figure holding a sword. Then, before Jiang Li could react, the figure charged into the space between his brows and spontaneously practiced various sword techniques in his sea of consciousness. Activated the gift of the sword cry in the heart-questioning sword cave. Added status, sword spirit's last gift. Sword spirit's last gift protects the mind from abnormal mental states and continues to nurture the sword heart. Sword type skill comprehension speed will increase by 300%. Sword heart strength will increase by 100%. Sword perception plus 10. Duration 3 months minus plus. After being stunned for a moment, Jiang Li still did not understand what had happened. He tested it a few times and confirmed that the white figure that appeared in his consciousness was harmless to him before he set this status to infinite duration. After coming to Shu Mountain and obtaining the Asura sword heart and the sword spirit's last gift, if he were to get any other sword cultivator statuses next, it was hard for him to imagine the expression of his beloved master when he returned to the sect. Apart from that, the Overlord body art finally reached the 7th level after these sword waves. As long as he advanced another level, he could attempt to turn the immovable Overlord body of the Overlord body art into a status. It was only a matter of time before he turned the immovable Overlord body into the moving Overlord body. He casually changed his clothes and stood up from the rock. "Oh, greetings, Peak Master Wei." Jiang Li had just finished when he saw Wei Wangxuan, who was standing at the side. With this person's cultivation, Jiang Li really did not notice when he had arrived. "Yeah, you sure made a big scene. Forget it if there's nothing else come out. Enter the demon subduing pagoda at noon 3 days later." After saying this, Wei Wangxuan turned around and flew away. Jiang Li scratched his head and followed behind him. There, 1,000 miles away, outside Nightless City, the 9 Nether clone looked at 100 tempering mountain merchant ship that was gradually leaving and muttered to himself. "Attack a merchant ship, interesting.